Victor Hale smiled when he handed Damian the photographs. That was the part nobody talked about later, the smile. Not the photographs themselves, not the lies sewn into every pixel, but the way Victor stood in that office with his hands folded and his mouth pulled into something calm and satisfied, like a man who had already won and was simply waiting for the other person to figure it out. He slid the envelope across Damian's desk the way you'd slide a dinner check, casual, unhurried, completely certain of the outcome. And when Damian's jaw tightened and his hands went still over the images of his pregnant wife meeting with his enemies, Victor said, "I'm sorry, boss. I thought you should know," in a voice so practiced and gentle it could have belonged to a priest. That smile, that voice, that single engineered moment, and everything that followed was already decided. If you have ever loved someone so completely that losing them felt like losing the ability to breathe, stay with this story. If you have ever made a mistake so catastrophic that you understood in the silence after, that no amount of money or power or words could pull it back, this one is for you. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notification so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Penthouse was the kind of quiet that had weight to it. Damian Cross stood in the elevator as it climbed to the 43rd floor, and he was already rehearsing. Not an apology. Damian Cross did not rehearse apologies, had not done so in the 11 years since he had taken over his father's organization, and turned it into something his father could never have imagined. He was rehearsing an explanation, a controlled delivery of selected facts designed to produce a specific reaction. He was good at that. He had built an empire on it. The elevator doors opened. The penthouse was dark, except for the kitchen light, and for a moment he thought she was already asleep. Serena kept early hours now. The pregnancy had pushed her body into a rhythm. She didn't choose exhausted by 8, awake again at 4, moving through the apartment in the gray pre-dawn, like a woman navigating a place that still felt unfamiliar. They had moved into the penthouse 6 months ago, after the threats against her became specific enough that Damian couldn't ignore them. She had packed her things from her apartment on Birchwood Street without complaint, which at the time he had taken as acceptance. He understood now that silence was not the same thing as agreement. He stepped into the living room and stopped. Her coat was gone. It was a small detail, a charcoal wool coat she had owned before she met him. Before any of this, something she had bought with her own money from a consignment shop on the north side, when she was still teaching and saving for a deposit on a studio apartment. She wore it when she went out, when she ran errands, when she needed to feel like herself, and not like the wife of Damian Cross. It hung on the hook near the door every single evening, without exception, and its absence now was so startling that he stood and stared at the empty hook for a full 4 seconds before his brain caught up. He moved to the bedroom. The closet was open. Her suitcase, the old canvas one, not the Italian luggage he had bought her, was gone. A row of hangers sat empty and swinging slightly, as if the door had been shut in a hurry and the air hadn't settled yet. He went back to the kitchen. The ring was on the counter beside the salt shaker. He saw the letter folded beneath it. He didn't move for a long time. Long enough that the refrigerator cycled off, and the apartment got even quieter, and the only sound was the distant, indifferent murmur of the city 43 floors below. Then he picked up the ring he had chosen himself. A simple platinum band, because she had told him once that she didn't like things that drew attention, didn't like flashing something on her hand that made people look, and he turned it over once between his fingers. It was warm. She hadn't been gone long. He unfolded the letter. Her handwriting was the careful, looping print of a woman who had spent years writing on classroom whiteboards, deliberate and legible, because she believed that communication was something you owed the reader. Every letter formed completely. No words crossed out. "I loved you enough to leave before our child learns to fear you." He read that line twice. Then he set the letter down on the counter and walked to the window and stood looking out at Chicago, the way a man looks at something he built when he's finally beginning to understand what it cost. 14 hours earlier, the photograph had been in his hands. Victor had come to the office on Michigan Avenue at just past noon, which was unusual. Victor typically called ahead, typically sent word through Marcus, the outer office manager who had been with Damian for 6 years and who had a gift for making unwelcome information sound like administrative updates. But Victor had come himself, and he had closed the door behind him, and the photographs had come out of a manila envelope that was already opened, as if Victor had been looking at them himself on the drive over and hadn't gotten around to resealing it. There were 4 photographs. Serena, clearly recognizable in the charcoal coat, sitting across a table from a man Damian knew. The man's name was Lev Borodin. He ran the Eastern Supply Corridor that Damian had been quietly strangling for 8 months, cutting off the revenue streams that kept Borodin's operation funded, because Borodin had made the mistake of trying to move into territory that bordered Damian's without the courtesy of a conversation. The photographs were time-stamped. The location was a coffee shop in Wicker Park. The meeting had apparently lasted 40 minutes. "How long have you had these?" Damian said. Not a question. His voice didn't change. His face didn't change. This was the thing about Damian Cross that made grown men careful around him. He didn't react in ways that told you what was coming. Victor said he had received them that morning from a contact embedded in Borodin's organization. He said he had verified the timestamps. He said he was sorry. Damian looked at the photographs for a long time. The thing that would destroy him later, that he would spend months turning over in the dark, testing the edges of like a man probing a broken tooth, was that he hadn't asked a single question. He hadn't asked what Serena was wearing beneath the coat, whether she had ordered anything, whether the body language between her and Borodin suggested familiarity or tension or fear. He hadn't asked how Borodin's embedded contact had known to photograph the meeting, or why photographs and not a recording, or why Victor was the one delivering them, instead of Damian hearing about it, through any of the dozen other eyes he had throughout the city. He had simply looked at the images of his pregnant wife, sitting across from his enemy, and felt something close like a door inside his chest. He had told Victor to leave. Then he had made the call he'd told himself he would never make. Her name was Cassandra Webb. She worked for Damian in a capacity he had never had to define to Serena, because Serena had never asked the right questions at the right time. Perhaps because Serena was too precise in what she needed to know and had decided early in their marriage that certain rooms in Damian's life were not rooms she wanted to walk into. Cassandra was 34, pragmatic, and completely without illusions about what Damian's call meant and what she was expected to do. She had worked for him for 3 years in the borderland between legitimate business and the other kind, and she was skilled at occupying ambiguous spaces without losing her footing. He called her at 1 in the afternoon. She arrived at the penthouse at 4. He did not think about Serena during those hours. He would later decide that the absence of thought was the worst part, not that he had made a terrible decision out of rage or grief, but that he had made it in a state of cold and mechanical deliberateness, the same state he occupied when he was shutting down a rival's pipeline or authorizing a reprisal. He had processed Serena's apparent betrayal as a threat requiring a response, and the response he had chosen was the most vicious kind, not violence, because Damian had never touched a woman in anger and never would, but the deliberate destruction of something she believed in. He wanted her to find out. He wanted her to understand what it felt like, just to discover that the person you trusted had made a choice that couldn't be pulled back. This was the kind of thinking that Damian Cross was capable of, and it was the reason that, despite everything that came after the dismantling, the transformation, the slow and painful reconstruction of a man who had never learned to be anything except dangerous. Serena would never be able to say she hadn't known who she married. She had known. She had married him anyway, which was its own complicated truth. What Damian did not know, what he had no way of knowing, was where Serena had actually been that afternoon in Wicker Park. She had been terrified. The meeting with Lev Borodin had not been arranged by her. It had been demanded. A note delivered through a woman at the grocery store on Chestnut, pressed into the paper bag with her vegetables, written in handwriting she didn't recognize, "Come alone. Wicker Park, noon. Or your husband gets proof of what his man Victor Hale has been doing with the Borodin money." She had gone. She had sat across from a man she had never met and listened to 40 minutes of carefully assembled information about financial transfers, moving through accounts attached to Damian's organization, accounts controlled by Victor Hale, accounts that were siphoning revenue away from Damian's operation and routing it into structures that Borodin's people had set up specifically to look at a casual inspection, like Damian authorized payments to ghost vendors. The implication was not subtle. Victor was embezzling from Damian, while simultaneously feeding intelligence to Borodin. The meeting wasn't Serena conspiring with the enemy. It was Borodin, through channels Serena didn't fully understand, warning her or perhaps using her to carry a message back. She had left the coffee shop with a USB drive and a phone number she was told to call only if Damian was in immediate danger. She had spent the next 6 hours trying to figure out what to do with what she knew. She could not simply walk it to Damian. She had no way to verify the documents on the drive without someone who understood the financial structures, someone she trusted, who wasn't inside Damian's organization. She had no one like that. Her world had narrowed, since the marriage, to a circumference that Damian's life defined. Her old colleagues from the school district, the friends from before, the sister in Milwaukee, distant from none of them, lived anywhere near the information she was now carrying. And beneath the tactical problem was the simpler, more terrible one. If Victor Hale was corrupt, then Damian was already surrounded by a betrayal he didn't know about. And if Damian found out about that betrayal through Serena, through a meeting with Borodin that she had attended alone, without telling him, carrying a USB drive full of documents about his own organization, she had no way of knowing whether he would believe her version or the version that someone had clearly designed for him to see. She was trying to protect him. She was also terrified of how it would look. By the time Serena came home from Wicker Park, Cassandra Webb was already at the penthouse. Serena keyed in at the lobby and rode up in the elevator, and the doors opened, and she was 2 steps into the entryway before she understood what she was seeing. It was not a dramatic scene. It was worse than dramatic. It was ordinary or constructed to appear ordinary, which in some ways required more cruelty than the dramatic version. Cassandra on the couch. Damian standing near the window with a glass of whiskey he barely touched. The specific flat quality in his eyes when he turned to look at her that told her everything and nothing simultaneously. She stood in the entryway with her coat still on. She said, "Damian." He said, "Serena," just her name, nothing attached. The silence lasted perhaps 10 seconds. In that silence, she understood that he knew something, or believed something, and that whatever he believed had preceded this had been decided before she walked in, had been arranged, perhaps, as punishment or as proof of something she didn't yet know she needed to disprove. She said, "Can she leave?" He said, "I'll walk you through to the kitchen," and led Cassandra to the door with a courtliness that was more insulting than dismissal would have been, because it demonstrated his control over every variable in the room, including himself. When Cassandra was gone, Serena was still standing in the entryway. She said, "What did someone tell you? What makes you think someone told me something? Because you've been drinking, and you only drink like that when you've been given information you can't act on yet. And because you've had someone here in our home, in the middle of the afternoon, which you've never done before." She paused. "And because you look at me the way you look at people when you've already tried them and found them guilty." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Wicker Park, noon." Everything in her went still. She said, "Damian, don't. You need to listen to me." "I've been listening to you," he said, "for 2 years. Evidently not carefully enough," she told him. She told him everything: the note in the grocery bag, the meeting, the man she hadn't recognized until Borodin introduced himself, the USB drive, the financial information, the warning about Victor. She told him in the careful, sequential way she told things when she needed to be believed, with no editorializing, just the facts in the order they had happened. She sat across from him at the kitchen table with her coat still on, because taking it off felt like a concession she wasn't ready to make, and she laid it out for him clearly and completely. He listened. When she finished, he said, "Where's the drive?" She got it from her coat pocket and put it on the table between them. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. Then he said, "You should have come to me first." "I know," she said. "I was trying to verify it before I said, you should have come to me first," he said again. His voice hadn't risen, but there was something in it that made the hair on her arms stand up, and not from fear of him, from grief. She would realize later, because she had heard that tone before, twice, and both times it had meant that something was ending. "I know," she said quietly. He picked up the drive. He turned it over in his hand. Then he stood and went to the window and stood with his back to her, and she sat and watched the tension in his shoulders and tried to read what it meant, and she couldn't. After 8 years of watching this man's back, she still could not always read him. And this was both what she loved about him and what had always frightened her. She said, "Damian." "I wasn't meeting with him as no," he said. And then, after a pause, "Go to bed." "I'm not going to bed." "Serena," his voice had changed, gone somewhere she couldn't follow. "Please go to bed." She went. She lay in the dark in the bedroom with her hands over the swell of her stomach, and she listened to the penthouse. She heard him on the phone. She heard the door open and close twice. She's Cassandra Webb's voice in the hallway, not the words, just the register. low and professional, and then nothing. She did not sleep. At 3 in the morning, she got up and walked to the kitchen in the dark and sat at the table with a glass of water and thought about her mother, who had stayed in an impossible marriage for 11 years because she believed in the idea of it even after the reality had become something else entirely. She thought about her students, the ones she had taught before all of this, 7th grade English on the far south side, kids who were already learning to read power dynamics the way other kids read picture books. She thought about the child growing inside her and what she wanted that child to know about strength. She thought about Victor Hale's smile and the way it had never sat right with her. She mentioned it to Damian once, 8 months ago, early in the pregnancy when she was still learning to trust her instincts about his world. She had said, "Something about Victor makes me careful." Damian had said, "Victor is loyal." And she had let it go because she was still learning where her voice ended and her silence needed to begin. She understood now that she had miscalculated. She went to the study and sat at Damian's desk and opened the laptop she wasn't supposed to use and plugged in the USB drive and started reading. The financial records were dense and deliberately obscured, but Serena had a mind built for pattern recognition. 11 years of teaching had sharpened her ability to find the thing that didn't belong, the answer that had been worked backward from a predetermined conclusion, the structure that looked correct until you put it next to something you knew for certain. She spent 2 hours going through the files. By 5 in the morning, she had identified 7 separate transfer pathways, moving money from accounts attached to Damian's import operation into shell structures that had been designed competently, but not perfectly, to look like authorized vendor payments. The total over 18 months was $11 million. The accounts were controlled by a holding company registered in Delaware. The signatory on the holding company was a name she didn't recognize. But the address on the registration, a property address used for correspondence, was a house in Lincoln Park that she had been to twice. A house that Victor Hale used for meetings he didn't want documented at the office on Michigan Avenue. She sat with that information in the early morning quiet and felt something move in her chest that wasn't the baby. Copied the relevant files to her own email. She wrote a summary, the kind of summary she used to write for her department head, when she needed to communicate complex information quickly to someone who didn't have time to read everything. 3 paragraphs. Facts, numbers, addresses, no editorializing. She printed it. She put it in an envelope with the USB drive and wrote Damian's name on the outside. Then she sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and tried to decide what to do next. Because here was the problem. Victor Hale knew that Borodin had made contact with her. Borodin had told her casually, in the practiced way of a man who uses information as currency, that Victor had already been told about the meeting. That was why Borodin had approached her in the first place, because Victor had told him that Serena was already suspicious of the financial discrepancies, that she had asked Damian about a payment she'd seen on a document left on his desk, and that Victor needed to know how much she knew before he decided what to do about her. The meeting in Wicker Park had not been Borodin warning her. It had been Victor using Borodin as a tool, running reconnaissance on his own position. And Serena had walked into it and told them exactly what she knew, which was, at that point, very little, and walked out with a USB drive, full of evidence that Borodin wanted Damian to have, because Borodin didn't need Victor anymore, now that the financial transfers were complete. She was a pawn in a game between men. She had been one since the moment someone slipped that note into her grocery bag. The difference between her and a pawn, she decided, sitting in Damian's chair in the gray early morning, was that she could see the board. She packed while Damian was asleep. She moved through the bedroom in the dark with a precision that came from practice. She had packed in a hurry before, twice, in the years before Damian, in circumstances she didn't discuss, and she took only what mattered: clothing, documents. The external drive where she kept her teaching certifications and her own financial records, accounts Damian didn't know about, because she had always understood, at some level below conscious decision, that a woman needed something that was hers alone. A small amount of cash from the household drawer, the prenatal vitamins, paperback she was reading. She left everything he had given her: the rings, the jewelry, the Italian luggage, the coat he had bought for her last winter, softer and warmer than her old one, which she had accepted, and then worn exactly once before going back to the charcoal one from the consignment shop. She took the old coat. She sat at the kitchen counter and wrote the letter. She had written things her whole life. Reports, lesson plans, emails to parents about their children. Entries in the journal she kept with no consistency, but with total honesty. Writing had always been how she understood what she actually thought, because the act of translating feeling into language forced her to name things precisely. She wrote the letter in the same spirit, not as a performance for him to read, but as a clarification for herself, because she needed to understand, before she walked out, that she was leaving for the right reasons. I loved you enough to leave before our child learns to fear you. She wrote 4 pages. She tore them up and wrote 2 paragraphs. She left the envelope with the USB drive on his desk. She left the letter on the kitchen counter beneath her ring. Called a car from an app. Damian's people didn't monitor. She had set it up months ago, quietly, when she first started feeling the particular kind of watchfulness that preceded a decision she hadn't made yet. The car came in 12 minutes. She walked through the lobby with her canvas suitcase and her old coat and a face that told the night doorman, who liked her and would later say so, exactly nothing. She rode through Chicago at 2 a.m. and watched the city she had lived in, for most of her adult life, move past the windows, and she pressed her hand against her stomach and she said nothing. Car moved north. Marcus found Damian standing at the kitchen counter at 7 in the morning. He had been standing there for a long time. Marcus could tell by the quality of his stillness, which was different from the stillness of a man who had just arrived at a place, and the stillness of a man who had been there long enough that his body had stopped fighting the position. The ring was in his right hand. The letter was on the counter, unfolded. Damian's face was composed in a way that Marcus, who had spent 6 years reading this man's face for information he could use to navigate the next 30 seconds, had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not grief. It was something that had no clean name. Something closer to a man who has walked out to the edge of something high and looked down and understands for the first time that he is capable of falling. Marcus said, "Boss." Damian didn't look at him. Marcus said, "Do you want me to?" She left her ring. Damian said. Marcus waited. She left her ring, Damian said again, more quietly. She wore it every day for 2 years, even in the shower. Even when she was angry, she never took it off. He set the ring down very carefully on the counter beside the letter. Gone. Marcus said, "I'll make calls. She doesn't want to be found. I'll be careful." Damian turned to look at him then. And Marcus, who was not a man easily unsettled, took a half step back. "She's pregnant," Damian said. "She is carrying my child, and she left in the middle of the night because..." He stopped. Something moved through his face that he pushed down before it could surface fully. "Find her. Don't approach her. Don't send anyone near her. I just need to know she's safe." "Yes, sir." "And find Victor." "Victor's at the Michigan Avenue office. He's been there since 7. "Of course he has," Damian said, and his voice had gone somewhere quiet and particular. A place Marcus recognized from 3 years ago, when a man named Garrett Payne had made the mistake of stealing from Damian's operation and then showing up to a meeting where Damian already knew. "Keep him there. Don't let him leave. Don't tell him why." "Yes, sir." And Marcus, "Sir, nobody touches Serena. Nobody goes near her. If I find out that anyone from this organization so much as drives past wherever she's gone..." He paused. "You understand me?" "Completely," Marcus said. He left the penthouse and stood in the elevator and thought about what he knew and what he suspected and what he had seen in Damian's face. And by the time the elevator reached the lobby, he had already started making calls. Victor Hale was in the Michigan Avenue office when Damian arrived at 9:30. He was reviewing quarterly logistics reports, which was something Victor did with visible diligence and which Damian had always read as conscientiousness, as the behavior of a man who cared about the details. It took exactly 23 minutes of reviewing the files on the USB drive, which Marcus had quietly sent to Damian's secure laptop, along with a preliminary financial analysis from their accountant, a woman named Helena, who had done work for Damian for 4 years, and who Marcus had reached at home at 7:15 to understand that the diligence had been performance. Victor had been extremely careful. Not careful enough. Damian sat across from Victor in the conference room, with the door closed and the USB drive on the table between them, and he watched Victor's face go through 4 distinct phases in the space of perhaps 2 seconds: recognition, calculation, decision, and then the final settling into something Victor had probably practiced, a performance of confusion and concern that would have been convincing to a man who wasn't already certain. Damian wasn't uncertain. He said, "Tell me about the Delaware holding company." Victor said, "I don't know what you're referring to." "Try again." "Damian, whatever this is." "The address is your Lincoln Park house," Damian said. "The transfers started 18 months ago. 11 million over 14 transfer events, which means you averaged about 800,000 every 5 or 6 weeks. You ran them through the ghost vendor accounts that you set up when we expanded the import operation, which means you had the authority to create them and the access to move money through them without triggering the internal audits. He paused. And you've been doing business with Borodin, not against him, with him. The room was very quiet. Victor said, I want a lawyer. This isn't that kind of conversation, Damian said. Damian. Victor leaned forward. Something in his face shifted, the performance dropping, replaced by something more direct, something that was almost relief, as if the secret itself had been a burden he was glad to set down. You were never going to be able to hold this empire together. You know that. The pressure from the federal side, the new players coming in from the West Coast, the cost of maintaining every alliance you've built it, was always going to fracture. I saw that 2 years ago. I made a choice to be on the right side of what was coming. Choice, Damian said. Yes, and Serena. Victor was quiet. You manufactured the photographs. Still quiet. You had someone follow her. You found the meeting with Borodin, which Borodin set up specifically to give her the evidence about you. Because Borodin doesn't need you anymore now that you've finished moving his money. You used the photographs to destabilize me. You wanted me to turn against her. Damian's voice was perfectly level. Why? Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, because you wouldn't have made a mistake on your own, and I needed you to make one. Damian said nothing. You were too careful, Victor said. Too controlled. If you'd examined the financial records the way you should have, you'd have found the transfers inside 3 months. But you trusted me to manage the accounts. You trusted me because I had been with you for 9 years, and you had never once had reason to doubt me. I needed something that would consume you, something that would make you act without thinking. He paused. Serena was the only thing in your life that could do that. The silence in the room lasted a long time. Then Damian stood up. He walked to the door and opened it, and said to Marcus, who was standing in the hallway, call Hendricks. Tell him to come to the office. Then he turned back to Victor and said, don't go anywhere. He walked to his own office and closed the door and sat behind his desk and picked up the ring he had been carrying in his jacket pocket since 7 that morning, and he held it in his hand, and he thought about a woman packing a canvas suitcase in the dark. He thought about what she had written. I loved you enough to leave. Thought about the child. He sat with all of that for exactly 4 minutes. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus and said, where is she? Marcus had found her. Not through Damian's surveillance network. Serena had been careful about that, had anticipated it with the kind of quiet intelligence that Damian was only now beginning to fully map. The intelligence of a woman who had been watching and learning for 2 years, and who had decided, at some point without ceremony or announcement, that she needed to be able to disappear if the situation required it. She had taken a car from an unmonitored app. She had used cash at a gas station 40 minutes north of the city. She had called no one. But she had turned her phone on at 8 in the morning to check the prenatal tracking app. She used something she didn't miss, had never missed, even when things were difficult, and that signal had been enough. She was at a property north of the city, a lakeside house that had been in a foreclosure cycle for 3 years and was technically unoccupied. Damian knew the property. He had looked at purchasing it once for reasons unrelated to any of this. The kind of detail that was going to occur to him later, in the quiet, when he had time to understand just how thoroughly Serena had been paying attention. Is she safe? Damian said. As of 90 minutes ago, Marcus said. Damian, there's something else. Damian waited. Borodin's people know where she is. The same signal that found her, they've been running the same trace. They have people moving north. Marcus paused. I think Victor made a call before you got to the office this morning. Damian was already moving. How many? He said. 4 vehicles. Maybe 12 men. Get Reyes and Chen. Tell them to meet me at the Ashland garage in 15 minutes. Police? No police, Damian said. Not yet. Not until she's out. He was already in the elevator. He put the ring back in his pocket. He moved through the lobby of the Michigan Avenue building, into the sharp morning air of Chicago, and he moved the way he had learned to move when everything was at stake, not fast, because fast was visible, but purposeful, every step committed, no wasted motion. A man walking toward something he could not afford to lose. The city moved around him, indifferent as always, full of people for whom none of this existed. He got in the car. Marcus called again as they pulled out. Victor's gone. Somebody let him leave. Damian absorbed that. Reyes and Chen are already moving, Marcus said. Good, Damian said. He thought about the lakeside house 40 minutes north. He thought about Serena in that empty property with her canvas suitcase and her old coat and the evidence she had spent the night compiling. The evidence she had been carrying since Wicker Park, the evidence that had been costing her since, before Damian had any idea what was actually happening. He thought about what she had said at the kitchen table the night before, her voice precise and unhurried, laying the facts down in the order they had occurred. Something about Victor makes me careful. She had seen it before he had. He had called it loyalty and looked away. He drove north through the Chicago morning, while the ring pressed against his ribs through the fabric of his jacket, and he said nothing, and the city fell away behind him, and the road opened up ahead, and he drove. The car hit the highway and Damian pushed it to 90. Reyes was in the passenger seat. Chen was behind him, already on the phone with someone Damian didn't ask about, pulling threads through a network of contacts that extended into places Damian's name couldn't go directly. The morning was gray and flat, the kind of February sky that sat on Chicago like a lid, and the road north unspooled ahead of them through a landscape of bare trees and brown fields and gas stations that hadn't been renovated since the 90s. Damian drove and did not speak. Reyes, who had been with him for 7 years, and who understood the specific weight of Damian's silence the way a musician understands a rest in the score, did not speak either. He watched the road and kept his phone face down in his lap, and breathed carefully, the way a man breathes when he is trying not to take up more space than the situation allows. Chen said from the back seat Borodin's vehicles are on Route 41. 4 SUVs. They're running hot, no attempt at cover. How far out, Damian said. 22 minutes, maybe 20 if they push. We're 30 out. Yes, Chen said. The word landed in the car and stayed there. Damian's hands on the wheel did not change. His jaw was set in a way that Reyes had learned, meant the calculation was running, that Damian was mapping variables, running outcomes, finding the version of the next hour that produced the result he needed. Reyes had watched him do this with supply chains, with rival negotiations, with federal inquiries that should have destroyed the organization, and hadn't. He had never watched him do it, with something personal, and the difference was visible in a place Reyes couldn't quite name, somewhere in the deliberateness of Damian's grip perhaps, or in the specific quality of his attention, which was usually distributed across the room, and was now entirely directed at the road ahead. She's alone, Damian said. As far as we know, Chen said. She doesn't know they're coming. Probably not. Does she have a phone? She turned it off after the signal at 8. Battery or deliberate, we don't know. Damian said nothing for a moment. Then can you get into the property's landline? If there is one. There is. The foreclosure filing listed it as active. Get the number and call it. Chen said, and if she doesn't answer. She'll answer, Damian said. She picks up unknown numbers. She always has. It's a habit from when she was teaching. Parents calling from different phones. She never broke it. Reyes glanced at him briefly. Detail, small, precise, the kind of thing you know only through years of watching someone sat in the car with them for a moment. Then Chen was on it, already dialing through to a contact who could pull the landline records from the foreclosure filing. Damian pushed the car to 94. The road moved under them. The landline rang 9 times before she picked it up. Hello. Her voice was careful, the kind of careful that wasn't fear, it was assessment. The voice of someone who had already decided not to give anything away before she understood what she was dealing with. Damian said, it's me. The silence lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Don't hang up, he said. I'm not hanging up, she said. Her voice hadn't changed. Still careful, still level. How did you find this number? It's on the foreclosure filing. Serena, listen to me. No, she said, and the word was not loud, but it was absolute. You don't get to start that way. You don't get to call me and say, listen to me, like I'm in one of your meetings. That's not how this works anymore. You're in danger, he said. Borodin's people are 20 minutes out. Victor called them before I got to the office this morning. They know where you are. The silence this time was different. How many, she said. 4 vehicles. Chen thinks 12 men, maybe more. He heard her breathe. One slow breath, the kind that comes after the initial landing of bad news when the body is recalibrating. I have the documents, she said. The originals from the drive and the printed summary. If they get those. They won't, Damian said. I need you to listen to me. Can you do that? Another pause. Shorter this time. I'm listening, she said. Don't go outside. The property has a basement, old lake houses that age always do, usually accessible through the kitchen. Get down there and stay away from the windows. I'm 30 minutes out. I'm coming to you, Damian. Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer, more direct. If you come here, you're driving into the same situation. They're not coming for me. They're coming for the documents, and they're coming for you if they find out you're on the way. I know. Then I'm coming, he said. Get to the basement. Take the documents. A pause. Okay, she said. He exhaled once silently through his nose. Damian, she said before he could speak again. Yes. What you did last night? She stopped herself. We're not doing that right now. I just want you to know I remember it. And we're going to talk about it when this is over. Yes, he said. We will. She hung up. Damian handed the phone back to Chen and put both hands on the wheel and drove. The Lakeside's house was set back from the road by about 200 meters of gravel path through birch trees that had gone skeletal in the February cold. It was a two-story structure built in the 50s, the kind of house that had been a family summer property once and had been passed down through 2 generations before the economics of it became impossible and the bank took it. The exterior was weathered gray cedar. The lake behind it was frozen in patches, the ice uneven and old-looking, the color of dirty glass. Damian knew the property because he had looked at acquiring it 3 years ago, not for himself, but for a logistics contact who needed somewhere to stage shipments coming in from the north. The contact had gone in a different direction, and the property had stayed in foreclosure, and Damian had filed it away in the part of his memory where things went that might become useful later. He had not imagined useful would mean this. He pulled the car off the road 200 meters before the gravel path and killed the engine. Reyes and Chen were already moving without being told. They had done this before, in configurations that were organized and with more men, and the adaptation to the current parameters happened automatically. The way trained reflexes adapt. Reyes took the east approach, through the tree line. Chen took the north, working toward the lakeside, where the property's rear entrance would be accessible from the dock structure. Damian took the path. He moved through the birch trees in the February cold, and the sound his feet made on the frozen ground was the only sound. No birds, no wind. The sky was the specific gray that precedes snow, without delivering it a held-breath kind of gray that pressed down on everything equally. He was perhaps 60 meters from the house when he heard the first vehicle. Not his vehicles. Different engines sound higher, the particular pitch of an SUV, being pushed hard through a road that wasn't designed for speed. Coming from the south, he moved faster. Serena had found the basement. It was exactly where Damian had said it would be, a door in the kitchen floor, the kind with a recessed handle, the wood swollen slightly with moisture and cold and disuse. She had wrestled it open and gone down into the dark with her phone screen lighting the way, and she had found a space that smelled of old water and concrete and the particular loneliness of abandoned places. A wooden shelf unit along one wall, a rusted water heater that hadn't run in years, a small window near the ceiling, ground level, that looked out onto the dead grass of the backyard. She put the documents in her coat's interior pocket. The USB drive she pushed into the waistband of her leggings, against her skin, because if she had to leave in a hurry, she needed both hands free, and she was not going to lose the evidence that had cost her this much. She stood in the dark basement and breathed and put her hand on her stomach. 7 months. The baby had been moving more in the last 2 weeks, not the fluttery, uncertain movements of the early months, but decisive, insistent, the movements of something fully formed and impatient. She pressed her palm flat and felt the child shift against her hand and thought, I know, we're going to be okay. She believed it approximately 60%. Upstairs, through the floor, she heard the front door. They came in through the front and the back simultaneously, which told Damian that they knew the property's layout, which meant Victor had given them more than a location. He was 40 meters from the house and moving along the east wall when the front door went in, not kicked but opened with a key or a pick, the sound of it deliberate and unhurried. 2 men visible through the birch trees on the north side, moving toward the back entrance with the particular rhythm of professionals who had done this before and who were not in a hurry, because they didn't think anyone inside knew they were coming. Damian counted. Front entrance, he guessed 3. Back 2 visible, probably a third covering the approach. 1 or 2 staying with the vehicles. The rest would be distributed across entry points he hadn't seen yet. He had Reyes and Chen. He had himself. He did the math and moved anyway. The first man he reached was covering the east wall between the front and back entrances, standing with his back partially to the tree line and his attention on the house, which was the mistake you made when you were confident the target didn't know you were there. Damian came out of the birch trees without sound. He was not a large man in the conventional sense, had never been built for the physical dimensions of his work, But he was precise and he was fast, and he had learned, in 20 years of operating in spaces where physical error meant death, how to close distance without announcing it. He took the man down without a sound. He kept moving. Inside the house, he could hear voices now. 2 of them, moving through the ground floor in a pattern that was systematic checking rooms, methodical, not desperate. They didn't think she'd gone far. They thought she was in a bedroom or a bathroom, scared and hiding, which meant Victor had told them she was pregnant and alone, and that the physical reality of her situation would make her manageable. Victor had not told them who her husband was. Damian came through the east side window into the kitchen. Reyes took the 2 on the north side. Chen, who was coming from the lake, ran into the 3rd man on the dock approach, and the situation escalated before he could contain it. A shot fired, suppressed but audible, the sound flat and sharp in the still February air. Damian heard it from inside the kitchen and moved faster. 2 men working the ground floor heard it too. Stopped. One of them closer to the kitchen door, maybe 8 feet from where Damian was standing against the wall, said something in Russian. Question from the inflection. The second man answered, shorter, definitive. Blit. The one coming toward the kitchen came through the door at a controlled pace with his weapon up and his eyes moving, and he almost cleared the space before Damian moved. Almost. The margin was perhaps a quarter of a second, and in that quarter second, Damian made 3 decisions in sequence so fast they felt like a single action, and the man went down hard against the kitchen counter and then down to the floor and stayed there. The second man heard the impact and came fast. Damian met him in the hallway. This one was bigger, more physically prepared, and the fight was not clean. Fights never were, in Damian's experience, despite the way films depicted them. It was brief and brutal, and Damian took a hit to the ribs that he would feel for the next 2 weeks and gave one back that ended the exchange. And he stood in the hallway afterward, breathing hard through his nose, with his hand braced against the wall. He went to the kitchen. He found the floor door and pulled it open. Society said, "It's me," he said. "It's done. Come up." A pause, and then her voice, from somewhere in the dark below, "Are you sure? Reyes and Chen are clearing the perimeter. Come up." Another pause. Then the sound of her moving, and then her hands on the edge of the doorframe. And then she was climbing up into the kitchen, and he put his hand out to help her, and she looked at it for exactly 1 second before she took it. She came up into the kitchen and stood and looked at him. There was a bruise forming along his jaw from the hallway fight. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. He was breathing harder than he wanted her to see, but she was already seeing it, because she always saw things he didn't intend to show. She said, "You're hurt." "I'm fine." I said, "You're hurt." That's not the same as a question. She reached up and put her fingers along his jaw, not gently with the clinical precision of someone checking damage, her eyes moving over the bruise with the same assessment she had given the phone call. "How bad are the ribs? Manageable." She dropped her hand. "Okay." She looked around the kitchen. The man on the floor, the open back door, the February air coming in off the lake. Victor called them. "Yes." "Before you reached him." "Yes." "So he knew you had the drive." Damian looked at her. "Someone let him leave the office. I told Marcus to keep him there, and someone let him walk out. I don't know yet who." She absorbed that. Her hand went briefly to her stomach, not a performed gesture, just instinctive, the way her hand had gone to the thing she needed to protect, without her deciding to do it. Then she said, "Where is he now?" "I don't know," Damian said. Her eyes came up to his. "That's not an acceptable answer." "I know, Damian." Her voice was controlled, but there was something running under it. Not fear. Not anger exactly. But the particular heat of someone who has been patient, long past the natural limit of patience, and is now operating in territory, where patience is no longer a resource she has. He knows what I know. He knows I have the documents. If he's out there and he's free, then this isn't over. Not even close. "I know," Damian said again. "Stop saying you know, and tell me what you're going to do about it." The kitchen was cold. Outside, Reyes was moving through the property, and Damian could hear Chen on the phone somewhere near the dock, his voice low and rapid. The man on the floor was not dead. Damian did not kill casually, had not done so in years, had made it a rule when he realized that the casual application of finality changed a person in ways that eventually became irreversible. But he was not going to be a problem for a while. "I'm going to find him," Damian said. And then he goes to Hendricks." She blinked once. "Hendricks is in the federal." She was quiet for a moment, processing that. Hendricks was a name she had heard twice in 2 years, always in context that told her he was someone. Damian maintained a specific careful distance from not an enemy, but something complicated, a man who existed on the other side of a line that Damian had drawn and respected. The fact that Victor was going to Hendricks told her several things at once. "You're giving him the financial records," she said. "All of them. That includes your own operation." "It includes what it includes," Damian said. His voice was even, but something in it had shifted a quality she couldn't name immediately, and then she could. It was the sound of a decision that had already been made. Not in this kitchen, not in the last 20 minutes, but somewhere earlier, perhaps in the hours before she had packed her bag, or perhaps long before that, somewhere in the accumulation of years that had brought him to a February morning in an abandoned kitchen with blood on his jacket and a pregnant wife looking at him with clear, exhausted eyes. "Damian," she said carefully. "I know what it means," he said. "I've known for a while." She looked at him for a long time. Then Reyes appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Serena, then at Damian, and he had the quality that made him valuable. The ability to read a room and calibrate accordingly, to deliver information without disrupting the thing already happening. "Property's clear," he said. "Chen's got the dockside locked down. 6 of Borodin's men are down non-lethal, but they're not going anywhere fast. 2 vehicles are still on the road. They're not moving. Waiting," Damian said. "That's what it looks like." "Waiting for what?" Serena said. Reyes glanced at Damian. Damian said Victor. She felt the word settle in her stomach like a stone dropped in still water. "Coming here himself," she said. It wasn't a question. "He has to," Damian said. "If Borodin's people are holding position, it means they're waiting for confirmation. Victor's the only one who can give it. He needs to know whether you got out, whether the documents are secured, whether I know what I know." He paused. "He has to see for himself." "Then we wait," she said. "You don't," Damian said. "Reyes is going to take you north." "No," she said. "Serena." I said no. Her voice was flat and specific, the voice she had used in classrooms when a decision had been made and was not open to revision. "I am not getting in a car and going further north with your man, while you stay here with 2 people against however many Victor is bringing. I have 7 months of evidence in my coat pocket and on my skin, and I am the only person in this situation who can verify its chain of custody if this goes to Hendricks. So I'm staying." Reyes was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had decided this conversation did not require his participation. Damian looked at her. She looked back. He said, "If this goes wrong—" "I know the risk," she said. "That's different from agreeing to leave." A long pause. "Stay in the basement," he said, "not negotiable." She considered it. "Fine, with the documents, obviously. And if you hear anything that sounds like the situation changing, I'll go out the window," she said. "The ground level one on the north side. I clocked it when I was down there. There's about 20 meters of open ground to the tree line. February bare trees. Low light? I can make it." Stared at her. She said, "What?" "You clocked the exit window," he said. "I always clock the exits," she said. "I've been married to you for 2 years. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. The involuntary response of a man who has just understood something about the person in front of him that he hadn't understood before. "Go back down," he said. "I'll come for you when it's done." She went. He listened to the sound of the floor door closing and stood in the cold kitchen and breathed. Victor arrived 47 minutes later. Came in a single car, which told Damian something. Not reckless Victor was never reckless but confident. He believed the situation was controlled. He believed Borodin's men had neutralized the property, that Damian might or might not be on the premises, but was likely too late, that Serena was either in custody or gone, and that whatever happened next could be managed from a position of strength. He walked through the front door of the abandoned lakeside house in a charcoal overcoat and leather gloves, and he came 3 steps into the entry hallway before he understood. The entry hallway was empty. Damian was in the living room, which opened off the hallway to the right. He was sitting in one of the old summer chairs facing the door. Reyes was by the window. Chen was behind Victor before Victor had completed the turn to look. Victor stopped. His face ran through its calculations. Quickly, Damian watched it happen. The rapid processing of the tableau, the assessment of variables, and then the particular stillness of a man who has decided that the only remaining move is to control the framing. "Damian," Victor said. His voice was the same voice from the Michigan Avenue office. Practiced, even almost gentle. "Sit down," Damian said. "Think we should, Victor." Damian's voice didn't change. "Down." Victor sat. He sat in the other summer chair. There were two of them, angled toward the dead fireplace, the furniture of a house that had been left in the middle of a summer and never returned to, and he put his gloved hands on his knees and looked at Damian with the eyes of a man who was still calculating. "The men outside," Victor said. "They're not available to you," Damian said. Borodin has already been contacted," Damian said. "He's been made aware that the financial transfers are documented and that the documentation is now in multiple locations. He's also been made aware that his cooperation with the federal investigation is going to look considerably better than his resistance to it." A pause. He made the right decision. Men like Borodin usually do, when the math is clear. Victor absorbed that. "You've spoken to Hendricks." "I spoke to Hendricks this morning," Damian said. "Before I drove up here. You were already gone from the office by then." Victor was quiet. 9 years, Damian said. Victor said nothing. "I gave you more access than I gave anyone," Damian said, "including Marcus, including my own accountant. You ran the financial architecture because I trusted you to run it, and I trusted you because you had given me 9 years without a visible reason not to." He paused. "The photographs of Serena. How long did that take to set up?" Victor looked at him for a moment. "Then the photography was opportunistic. Borodin was already making contact with her. I didn't arrange that. When I found out about the meeting, I saw how it could be used." "You didn't arrange it," Damian said. "No, but you used it." "Yes." "And last night?" Damian's voice didn't rise, didn't roughen, stayed exactly where it had been. "You knew what I would do." "I knew what you were capable of," Victor said. "When you felt betrayed." "Yes, the room was very quiet." "You used my wife," Damian said. "You used her and my unborn child as instruments to destabilize me." He stopped. Something moved in his face briefly, and then was controlled. Was it worth it? Victor looked at him steadily. "I believed the organization was going to collapse regardless of what I did. I chose to be positioned for what came after." A pause. "Would have done the same." "No," Damian said. "Damian, not that. Not with a pregnant woman. Not with my family." His voice was still level, but the level had changed. It was the flatness of absolute conviction, not of suppressed emotion. Difference between us. And I missed it for 9 years. Victor said nothing. Chen's phone buzzed. He looked at it and said, "Hendricks is at the county road. 12 minutes. Victor's eyes moved to Chen, then back to Damian. Something shifted in them, not panic. Nothing so readable, but a recalculation. A final assessment of remaining options and their likelihood of success. His hands on his knees were very still. "The organization," Victor said. "Everything you've built is finished," Damian said. "I know that." 11 years, Victor Damian stood. He stood the way he always stood, completely, without using the chair arms, a quality of physical control that was as habitual rather than performed. "I need you to stop now." Victor stopped. Damian went to the kitchen. He opened the floor door. "Serena's," he said. A pause. "Done?" she said from the dark. "It's done," he said. "Come up. There are people you need to meet." She came up slowly, and he put his hand out, and this time she took it without the 1-second pause. She came into the kitchen and looked at him, and her eyes went to the bruise on his jaw, which had darkened in the last hour, and then to his hands, and then to his face. "Victor," she said in the living room. "Hendricks is 12 minutes out." She nodded once. Then she reached into her coat's interior pocket and pulled out the folded documents. She held them in both hands for a moment, not reluctant, just precise. A person making sure she was transferring something carefully. She held them out to him. He took them. Their hands touched briefly in the transfer, just the fingertips, a moment of contact that neither of them prolonged or acknowledged, and then she pulled her hand back and put it over her stomach. 12 minutes, she said. "Yes, okay," she said. She walked past him into the hallway. He stood in the cold kitchen with the documents in his hand and the ring in his pocket and the sound of Reyes moving somewhere in the house, and he looked at the open basement door for a moment before he closed it. Then he followed her into the hallway. Through the house's single intact front window, he could see the road, and on the road, still, the 2 SUVs that had been waiting for Victor's signal, for confirmation of a plan that had failed, before it could produce its intended outcome. As Damian watched, one of the SUVs began to move, then the other, pulling out slowly, without urgency, the unhurried departure of men who had received information through channels Damian couldn't see and had decided that the calculation no longer favored remaining. Borodin had made his choice. In the living room, Victor Hale sat with his gloved hands on his knees, and his face composed into an expression of absolute stillness, and he waited for what came next, the way a man waits for something he has known was coming for a long time, and is simply by arrangement of events that had now run out. And in 11 minutes, the sound of federal vehicles on the gravel road reached the house, and the February light was flat and gray and indifferent. And Damian Cross stood in the hallway of an abandoned lakeside house, with evidence in one hand and nothing in the other, and he understood that the thing he was standing at the edge of was not a choice he was about to make, but one that had already been made. Somewhere back in the accumulation of everything that had led to this morning, and that what came next was not a question of whether, but only of how completely he was willing to let the old life go. Serena stood 2 feet away from him, not touching, her hand on her stomach, her eyes on the window, waiting. He had put her here. Not just here, in this house, in this February cold, with evidence in her coat and federal vehicles on the road. He had put her in the position of being a woman who packed in the dark and left her ring on the counter and wrote 4 pages and tore them up and wrote 2 paragraphs instead, the compressed version, the version that said only what couldn't be left unsaid. He had done that with one night of choices made in the cold machinery of wounded pride, and the fact that those choices had been engineered, that Victor had designed the moment specifically to produce exactly what it produced, did not make them unmade. He had chosen. He had chosen with every piece of information he had available to him, and the information had been false, and he had not asked a single question. That was the part he was going to have to live in. The federal vehicles came down the gravel road, and the bare birch trees stood along either side of the path, and somewhere behind the property, the frozen lake lay silent and gray. And Damian Cross stood in the hallway of an abandoned house and understood that there was no version of what came next that restored anything. There was only what he built from here, if she let him build it, if he deserved the chance to try. The first federal vehicle came down the gravel path at 11 Vauere. Damian watched it through the window. Black SUV, then a second behind it, then a third, not the unmarked sedans of a preliminary inquiry, but the specific configuration of an organized arrival, which told him that Hendricks had not come to negotiate the terms of a conversation. He had come with the full weight of what Damian had offered him on the phone that morning, and he had brought enough people to make sure that weight could not be retracted. Damian had made that call knowing exactly what it meant. He made it anyway. Serena was standing 2 feet to his left, and she felt the shift in his posture before the vehicles had fully stopped a small thing. The way his weight settled differently, particular quality of stillness that preceded a moment he had prepared for but not made peace with. She didn't say anything. She watched the vehicles through the window beside him, and her hand stayed on her stomach, and her face was the face she wore when she was thinking faster than she wanted to show. The doors opened. Men in federal jackets moved across the frozen yard with professional economy, not rushing, not dramatic. The unhurried motion of people operating well within their competence. And then Hendricks himself came out of the second vehicle. She had expected someone like Damian. She didn't know exactly why, perhaps because the men Damian measured himself against had always been, in the fragments she'd gathered, a specific type, controlled, built for projection. The kind of person who understood that presence was its own form of power. Hendricks was not that. He was a lean man in his late 50s, with a gray suit that had been cleaned but not pressed recently, and the eyes of someone who had spent so long looking for the thing, hidden beneath the surface of things, that he'd lost the ability to look at anything straight on. He moved without flourish. He came through the front door of the house, and he looked at the room, the man on the hallway floor, Chen by the window, Reyes near the door, Victor Hale sitting in the summer chair with his gloved hands on his knees, and he took all of it in the way you take in a room you've been given the address to, recognizing it from description rather than discovering it. His eyes moved to Damian, then to Serena. Mrs. Cross, she said, Agent Hendricks. He looked at her for a moment, just a moment, clinical and specific, the look of a man cataloging something he hadn't expected to find in the condition he found it. Are you all right? I'm 7 months pregnant, and I've been in a basement for 40 minutes, she said. But I'm uninjured. Yes, he nodded once. Then he looked at Damian. You said you had documentation. Damian held out the folded papers. Hendricks took them without ceremony. He didn't look at them immediately. He passed them to the agent behind him, a young woman with a laptop bag who took them with gloved hands and moved to the corner of the room. Then he looked at Victor. Victor looked back at him with the face of a man who has decided that the remaining performance is dignity. Victor Hale, Hendricks said. You know who I am, Victor said. I do, Hendricks said. He pulled out a chair from the room's single intact table, an old folding card table that had probably been left by the previous owners, and sat down across from Victor with the relaxed authority of a man sitting down to a meal he'd already ordered. We've been interested in you for about 14 months. Something moved in Victor's face, small, gone immediately. 14 months, Damian said. Hendricks glanced at him. We'll get to that. We'll get to it now, Damian said. The thing Hendricks said next was the thing that changed the shape of everything. He said it carefully, in the measured cadence of a man delivering information he knows will land hard, and who has made a professional decision to deliver it without softening. Because softening would be its own kind of disrespect. He said, the investigation into your organization, Mr. Cross, has been running for 22 months. Victor Hale has been a cooperating source for 14 of those months. The room went very quiet. Damian stood completely still. He was not cooperating voluntarily. Hendricks continued. He was cooperating under the terms of a proffer agreement, negotiated after we identified his financial exposure in a separate matter. The embezzlement scheme you uncovered was real. The transfers to Borodin were real. But Victor's original cooperation with our office predates both of those by 8 months. Serena watched Damian's face. She had watched his face in difficult moments before the controlled stillness of a man who processed things inward, who never gave a room the satisfaction of watching him absorb a blow. But there was something different in it now. Not the controlled stillness. Something beneath the control. Something that the control was visibly working to contain. She said quietly, "What does that mean?" "Practically." Hendricks looked at her. "It means that some of the information your husband has provided to us this morning, the financial documentation, the operational structure, we already have portions of it. Through Victor." A pause. "It also means that the leverage Victor held over your husband's organization was not only financial. Victor has been providing operational intelligence to its office for over a year. Personnel, locations, movement patterns. Damian said he was feeding you information about my people, while he was also feeding Borodin." "Yes." The word sat in the room. "He was running both directions simultaneously," Damian said. His voice was completely flat. "Giving you enough to sustain his agreement and protect himself from prosecution. Giving Borodin enough to maintain the financial relationship and build his exit position. And running the embezzlement underneath both of it." He paused. "For 14 months. "That's correct," Hendricks said. Damian looked at Victor. Victor met his gaze without flinching. And in the specific quality of that steadiness, the absence of apology, of shame, even of the defensive self-justification he had deployed in the Michigan Avenue office, Damian understood something he hadn't understood before. Victor was not a man who had broken under pressure and made a desperate arrangement. Victor was a man who had made a strategic decision, well in advance, and had executed it with patience and precision. Across 14 months of daily interaction with Damian, daily proximity, daily performance of loyalty. 9 years. And then 14 months of something else entirely, running concurrently with the 9 years, underneath them, so thoroughly integrated into the texture of the daily operation that Damian had not seen a single edge of it. "The night you had me stay at the office," Damian said. Victor said nothing. 3 months ago, the logistics review. "You said it to be that night because the courier window was closing." Damian's voice was still flat, still level. Serena was at the apartment alone. Someone came in through the service entrance. She thought it was a maintenance call building management had been in that week. The maintenance company said they had no record of the visit. Serena turned to look at him. "Someone searched the apartment," Damian said. "I assumed it was Borodin running reconnaissance. I increased the building security, and I didn't tell you," he said. The last part directed at Serena, "because I didn't want you to be frightened. And because I thought I had contained it." He looked at Victor. "It was your people," he said. "In my apartment, with my pregnant wife there." Victor said, "I needed to know what she had found." The room temperature seemed to drop. "She hadn't found anything yet," Victor said. At that point, I needed to be certain. Damian took one step toward him. Reyes moved not to intervene, but to position, the automatic calibration of a man reading a room that is about to change. Hendricks stayed where he was, watching with the careful attention of someone who's decided that the next 30 seconds are more informative than anything he could produce by interfering with them. Damian stopped. He stopped himself. The effort of it was visible in the line of his jaw, in the precise, deliberate unclenching of his right hand, in the breath he took through his nose that was slightly longer than the breaths before it. He stood 2 feet from Victor, and he stopped, and he stood there for a moment, and then he turned around and walked back to the window. Serena watched him. She had never seen him stop himself like that. She had seen him controlled, always controlled in ways that sometimes frightened her, because control of that degree suggested the size of what was being controlled. But she had never seen him apply that control to himself in a moment when he had every justification not to, when the stopping itself cost him something visible. She filed that away in the part of her that was always quietly keeping records. Hendricks took Victor out to the second vehicle at 11:47 a.m. 2 of his agents stayed in the house with Damian, Serena Reyes, and Chen, not aggressively, but with the specific territorial quality of federal presence that didn't need to assert itself, because it was simply there. The young woman with the laptop was going through the documents at the card table. Another agent was photographing the hallway and kitchen. The men Damian had put down had been removed, quietly, with a professionalism that told Serena this was not the first abandoned house Hendricks had processed. Damian was on the phone. He was standing near the dead fireplace, with his back partially to the room, and Serena could hear fragments, names, account numbers, a property address in Lincoln Park, the word infrastructure twice. His voice was the office voice, the voice of a man conducting business, but beneath it she could hear something she hadn't heard before, an exhaustion. Not the physical kind, though the rib he'd taken in the hallway was clearly bothering him. She could see it in the slight favoring of his right side, the way he'd braced against the mantelpiece. The other kind. She sat in one of the summer chairs. She was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the basement or the cold or the 7 months of pregnancy weight she was carrying. Though all of those were real, she was tired of the shape of the last 18 hours. The note in the grocery bag, the coffee shop in Wicker Park, the drive home with the USB drive pressed against her hip, the kitchen table conversation and the night that followed, and the letter she had written and rewritten, the canvas suitcase in the dark, the 2 hours in the basement of this house, reading financial records by laptop light while a child moved inside her with complete indifference to the circumstances. All of it had taken something out of her that she didn't know the name of. She put her head back against the chair. The ceiling of the lakeside house was tongue-and-groove pine, the kind that had been fashionable in summer houses built in a specific decade and was now weathered to the color of old honey. There was a water stain in the northeast corner, a cobweb along the junction of wall and ceiling that had been there long enough to collect dust. The remnants of a summer house life, a nail where a painting had hung, a strip of tape on the window frame where someone had once made a mark, the domestic evidence of people who had been here and were now entirely gone. She thought about her mother's kitchen. It was an involuntary thing. The way those thoughts came, her mother's kitchen on Calvert Street, the yellow curtains, the specific sound of the refrigerator, the chair her mother always sat in that had worn a small depression in the linoleum over years of use. She had grown up in that kitchen. She had done homework at that table. She had eaten breakfast there on the morning of her first teaching job, and on the morning after her first real heartbreak, and on the morning after she decided to stay in Chicago instead of taking the position in Boston. She had never brought Damian to that kitchen, intended to, in the early months. She had told her mother about him carefully, in the selective way you tell a parent about a person you're not sure how to explain. Her mother had asked 3 questions. Is he kind to you? Does he make you feel safe? Do you trust him? And Serena had answered yes to all 3, and believed all 3 answers, and had only later understood that kindness, safety, and trust were not static conditions. They were ongoing choices, and the person you trusted had to keep choosing them. She didn't know, sitting in the summer chair in the abandoned house, whether Damian was capable of that kind of ongoing choice. She knew he was capable of the dramatic version, the driving through February dark, the fighting through the hallway, the call to Hendricks that would cost him everything. She had no question about his capacity for the large gesture. It was the small ones she couldn't see. Damian finished the call and stood at the fireplace for a moment with his phone in his hand. Then he turned around and looked at her. She didn't look away. He came and sat in the other summer chair. He sat in it the way he sat in chairs fully, without hedging the position, his weight committed, and he was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands. She waited. The organization is done, he said. Everything above the legal threshold goes to Hendricks. What's under it, I'm going to dismantle myself. It'll take time, a few months, but it's done. She looked at him. I know that doesn't change what happened, he said. No, she said. It doesn't. I'm not offering it as a trade. Good, because it isn't one. He looked at his hands again. Apartment is compromised. Victor's people were in it. I have to assume the security systems are as well. We can't go back there. I wasn't planning on going back there, she said. I know. He stopped. This was unusual. She had watched him choose words with precision for 2 years and rarely seen him start a sentence he couldn't finish. I wanted to be the one to say it wasn't an option, rather than you discovering that I'd assumed you'd just come back. She studied his face for a moment. Okay, she said. I have a property on the North Shore. Helena knows about it, nobody else. Clean. I'd like you to stay there until the situation with Borodin and Victor's remaining contacts is resolved. You don't have to. How long? She said. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Is it a decent size? He blinked once. Yes, because I'm not spending 3 weeks in a small space. Not in this condition, he said. It's 11 rooms. Fine, she said. They sat in silence for a moment. Then she said, Damian, I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. Yes, he said. Victor has been providing information to federal authorities for 14 months, which means that for 14 months, Hendrix's office has known the structure and operation of your organization at a level of detail that should have been enough to move against you. She paused. Why didn't they? Damian was quiet. That's not a simple answer, he said finally. I know it's not simple. Tell me anyway. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, because Hendrix didn't want the organization. He wanted what was above it, the suppliers, the import network. Political and law enforcement connections that have been insulating the operation from federal pressure for the last 6 years. Victor couldn't give him those. Victor only had visibility into what I ran directly. People above me, the people I pay, and the people I move money for. Victor didn't have access to them. So Hendrix kept the agreement running. Used Victor to map what he could map, and waited for a moment when I might be willing to give him what Victor couldn't. She was quiet. Last night, she said. When I called him this morning, yes. He knew it was a moment. Damian's jaw moved once. He was prepared for it. The documentation I gave him this morning, the financial records from the drive, he already had significant portions of it from Victor. The import network connections. The political infrastructure. I gave him things this morning that Victor couldn't have given him in 14 months of cooperation. She absorbed that, so you were the prize, she said. Victor was the mechanism, yes. And Victor knew that. Damian looked at her. Victor was building toward it. He was controlling the timeline, feeding Hendrix enough to sustain the agreement, feeding Borodin enough to complete the financial transfers, running the embezzlement to build his own exit funds, and waiting for a moment when he could use me to close out the federal side in a way that gave him maximum credit for cooperating. A pause. He needed me to break. He needed me to do something that Hendrix could use as leverage. Or he needed me to cooperate voluntarily. Either way, Victor was the architect of the outcome. She said, he used me to break you. Yes, he used our child. Yes. She stood up. She didn't do it with drama, she simply stood. The careful way she stood now, when she'd been sitting for a while, one hand on the chair arm, the other automatically going to her stomach. She walked to the window. Outside, the federal agents were moving with their systematic economy through the frozen yard. One of the birch trees near the path had a strip of yellow tape around it. For some reason she didn't understand. I want to be angry at him, she said. Victor, and I am. But the thing I keep coming back to is, she stopped. He built the entire plan on one assumption, that you would react to those photographs the way you did, that you would not ask questions, that you would choose punishment over inquiry. She paused. He was right. Yes, Damian said. He knew you well enough, after 9 years, to know exactly how you would respond to the belief that I had betrayed you. Yes. That's not just a betrayal of you, she said. That's a betrayal of what he knew about us, about who we were to each other. She kept her eyes on the window. He weaponized your capacity to destroy the things you love when you're frightened. The room was very quiet. Damian said, Don't, she said, not harshly, just specifically. I'm not looking for an apology right now. I have the apology coming, I know, I do, and I'll hear it when I'm ready to hear it. Right now I'm just trying to understand the shape of what happened. She paused. What does Hendrix want from you now? In practical terms. Damian stood. Testimony. Documentation on the import network. Names. He'll provide protection in exchange relocation if necessary, though I don't think it will be. People above me are influential, but they're not operational. They'll make noise, and then they'll make arrangements. And you. Conditional immunity for the organizational structure. I'll face civil forfeitures, the properties, the financial accounts. Criminal exposure for specific actions is more complicated. He stopped. I'm going to need a good lawyer. You're going to need several, she said. Yes. She turned from the window. She looked at him across the room, this man she had married. This specific and complicated and deeply flawed man who had built a life out of controlled force and who was now standing in an abandoned lakeside house with a bruise on his jaw and a torn jacket and the expression of someone standing at the far edge of everything he had constructed, looking back at it. She said, "Are you scared?" He held her gaze. "Yes." "Good," she said. "You should be." Call came at 1:23 p.m. Damian's phone, the secondary number, the one that only 6 people had. He looked at the screen, and the number was not one of the 6. It was a number he didn't recognize, and under normal circumstances, he would not have answered an unknown number on that phone. He answered it. Mr. Cross. A voice he didn't recognize. Male, accented Eastern European, but not Russian. Something adjacent. Careful. The voice of someone choosing each word with the deliberateness of a person operating in a second language they'd mastered. "I'm calling on behalf of the interest you're currently in the process of dismantling." Damian's eyes went to Hendrix's agent across the room. The agent looked up. Damian turned slightly away and said, "You have 30 seconds. "We have your wife's sister," the voice said. "Claire Bowman, Milwaukee. She was brought in this morning, before your lake house situation resolved itself. We apologize for the timing. These things have their own schedule." Damian stopped breathing for precisely 2 seconds. "She's comfortable," the voice said. "She is not harmed. She will remain that way as long as the information you provided to federal authorities this morning is revised. We understand revisions are possible in the early stages of cooperation. Memories can be uncertain. Documents can be misattributed." Damian said nothing. "You have 6 hours," the voice said, "after which the comfort of Mrs. Bowman's situation becomes considerably less certain. There is a number that will be sent to this phone in the next 30 seconds. You will call it, and you will tell the person who answers what you have decided. We prefer not to use intermediaries for the final conversation." A pause. "We understand you are a man who makes difficult decisions efficiently, counting on that quality." The line went dead. Damian stood with the phone in his hand. The secondary number. 6 people had it. One of them was in federal custody. One was Reyes, one was Chen, one was Marcus, one was Helena, the accountant, and one was Serena. He turned. She was looking at him from across the room. She had read his face in the 10 seconds of that call, read the stillness, the particular quality of it, the way his shoulders had locked, and he could see in her eyes that she had already started to understand that something had shifted. "Damian," she said. He walked to her. He walked to her deliberately, and he stood close enough that he could say the next thing quietly, without Hendrix's agent hearing it from across the room. He said, "They have Claire." Her face changed. Not dramatically, Serena's face didn't do dramatic things, had been trained out of them, or had trained itself, he wasn't sure which. But something fundamental shifted in the arrangement of it, a change at the structural level, beneath the controlled surface. "My sister," she said. "Yes." "How? They moved this morning. Before we reached this house. They were covering multiple contingencies." He paused. "Hours," she looked at him. Her eyes were doing the calculation, he could see it, the rapid movement through possibilities and their implications. She pressed her lips together once and then said, "What do they want?" "For me to retract what I gave Hendrix this morning." She looked across the room at Hendrix's agent, then back at Damian. "Can't do that," she said. "I know, even for Claire." "I know," he said. "If I retract, Hendrix pulls the immunity agreement. Everything I've already provided becomes evidence against me, with no protection. The people above the organization don't stop coming. They just know that the threat of one person's safety is enough to move me. They'll use it every time they need leverage." He paused. "And they'll still hurt her anyway." Her jaw was tight. "So what do we do?" "I tell Hendrix," he said, "right now. And we give him what he needs to move on Claire's location." "You don't know her location." "No, but Hendrix has resources I don't. And the people who did this aren't subtle, they moved fast, which means they left traces." He held her gaze. "I need you to trust me to do this the right way." She looked at him for a long time. The irony of those words, "trust me," landed in the space between them, and neither of them acknowledged it, and both of them felt it. "Go," she said. "Tell him everything." He crossed to Hendrix's agent. Behind him, Serena put both hands on her stomach and stood very still, and looked at the window and at the frozen lake beyond it and said nothing. The February light had not changed. The sky was still the held-breath gray. The birch trees stood bare and indifferent along the gravel path, and somewhere outside Chicago, in a city north along the lake, a woman who had grown up in a yellow-curtained kitchen on Calvert Street was being held. Because her sister had married a man who built his life on power, and the people who lived above that power had decided that the most efficient way to protect it was to reach into the only place they thought Damian Cross could not afford to look away from. And they were right. He could not afford to look away, which meant that the choice in front of him was not between his freedom and Claire's safety, as they had framed it. It was between the man he had been, the man who operated through controlled force and calculated response, and the protection of his own position, and something else. Something he did not have a practiced name for. Something that was going to cost him more than anything he had paid yet. He reached Hendrix's agent and said, "I need Hendrix back in here." The agent looked at him. Now Damian said. Hendrix came back into the house at 1:31 p.m. He came through the front door with his jacket still on and his eyes already reading the room, reading Damian specifically, the quality of his stillness, the way Reyes had repositioned near the door, without being asked, and Chen was standing with his phone down and his attention fully present. Hendrix had spent 30 years in rooms where the atmosphere changed before anyone said a word, and he read this one in the 3 seconds it took him to cross the threshold. He said, "What happened?" Damian handed him the phone. Hendrix looked at the screen, the unknown number, the timestamp, the call duration of 47 seconds, and then he looked up. "Play it," Damian said. "I don't have the recording." "I do." Damian took the phone back, opened the secondary recording app. He ran on all calls through that number, a habit so old it was automatic, installed before he understood why he needed it, and played the 47 seconds. The voice filled the room. Hendrix listened without moving. Face did nothing. When the recording ended, he said Eastern European, Russian. Romanian, Chen said from across the room. The rhythm's wrong for Russian, and the word choice, intermediaries. That's a direct translation of a Romanian idiom. Hendrix looked at Chen. "I grew up in Bucharest," Chen said, "until I was 12. Hendrix processed that without comment. He handed the phone back to Damian and said, "The network you partially described this morning, the import infrastructure. Are there Romanian-connected nodes?" "Two," Damian said. "A logistics firm in Cicero and a financial services company operating out of the Loop, both used for moving money through legal channels. I gave you the Cicero firm this morning." "The financial company," he paused. "I was going to give you that in the second session. Give it to me now." Damian gave it to him. Name, address, principal officer, account structures, the name of the attorney who had set up the layered ownership in 3 separate jurisdictions. He gave it in the flat sequential manner of someone who had been carrying this information for a long time and had made the decision to put it down. Hendrix had the young agent typing before Damian finished the second sentence. Serena stood by the window and watched and said nothing. Hendrix said, "Claire Bowman, Milwaukee. We'll need everything you know about her routine workplace, home address out, regular locations." "I don't know her routine," Damian said. "I've met her twice." Hendrix looked at Serena. She crossed the room. She stood beside Damian, not touching, a foot of air between them, but beside him in the specific way that meant she had made a decision about position, and she said, "Claire lives in the River West neighborhood. She works at a pediatric clinic on Locust Street, Tuesday through Saturday, 7 to 4. She runs in Riverside Park on mornings she doesn't work. She drives a gray Civic 2019. She parks on the street 2 blocks from her apartment because the lot is too expensive." A pause. "She doesn't know anyone who would do this. She has nothing to do with any of this. She is 31 years old, and she teaches kids how to use their inhalers, and she votes in every election, and she's the person I call when things are bad." Her voice was completely controlled. Control was the most frightening thing in it. "Get her out." Hendrix held her gaze. "We will, that's not sufficient," she said. "Mrs. Crossett. I know who you are, and I know what your office is capable of, and I know what your priorities are," she said. "Your priorities are the network. They're the names my husband gave you this morning. They're the testimony and the documentation and the import infrastructure. And Claire is one person who became leverage because someone needed to control a situation. I understand that. I also understand that if she dies, because your office prioritized the network over her extraction, I will spend the rest of my professional life, whatever that turns out to be, making sure the specific failure is documented in a way that cannot be buried." She paused. "I taught school for 11 years. I know how to write a report that people read." The room was very quiet. Hendricks said, I understand you. Then act accordingly, she said. She walked back to the window. Damian watched her go. He watched the line of her back, straight, unyielding, the posture of a woman who had been exhausted for 18 hours and was running on something that wasn't energy anymore, but hadn't found a name for what it was. He turned back to Hendricks. 6 hours, he said. I know, Hendricks said. That clock started at 1:23. I know, Hendricks said again. He was already on his phone. They moved out of the lakeside house at 2:15 p.m. Damian put Serena in the car with Reyes and gave Reyes the address of the North Shore property, 11 rooms, clean, known only to Helena, kind of property that existed in no organizational records because Damian had purchased it through 3 layers of personal trust rather than through any structure Victor had ever touched. He gave Reyes 3 additional names, men not connected to the Michigan Avenue operation, men who owed Damian the kind of debt that didn't require an organizational framework to collect, and told him to have all 3 at the North Shore property within 90 minutes. Serena got in the car without argument. At the window before Reyes pulled out, she looked at Damian. She said, don't do something stupid. He said, define stupid. Anything that gets you killed before we've had the conversation we need to have. He held her gaze. All right, Damian, I hear you. She held his gaze for 1 more second. Then she said, bring my sister home, and looked forward. And Reyes pulled the car out onto the gravel road and into the bare February tree line and was gone. Damian stood and watched the car until it disappeared. Then he got in the second car with Chen and 2 of Hendricks's agents and drove south toward Chicago. The financial services company on the loop was called Meridian Capital Advisory Services, which was the kind of name designed to produce complete indifference in anyone who heard it. The corporate equivalent of beige, calibrated to exist without creating memory. It occupied the 14th floor of a building on Wacker Drive that also housed a dentist, a mid-market law firm, and the regional office of a national accounting chain. The building's lobby had the particular anonymity of a place where the architecture had been deliberately drained of any quality that might make it remarkable. Damian had been inside twice, both times as a client, both times for meetings that appeared in no documentation he controlled. He knew the layout. He knew that the principal officer, a man named Aldrich Vasile, who ran the company's visible operations and who also happened to be the person whose voice Damian was 40% certain he had heard on the 47-second call, maintained a private office at the building's northeast corner, accessible through a secondary entrance on the 14th floor that connected to the building's freight elevator. He knew this because Victor had told him, 18 months ago, in the context of a logistics conversation about document transport. Victor had told him many things. Chen said from the passenger seat, Hendricks has a team on the building. 4 agents, exterior surveillance. They won't move until he authorizes it. When does he authorize it? When his Milwaukee office has eyes on Claire Bowman's location. Chen paused. They're working on. How long? He said 90 minutes. That was 40 minutes ago. Damian looked at the building through the windshield. The February afternoon had gone flat and pewter, the light low and directionless, the kind of afternoon that made every surface look provisional. The freight entrance, Damian said. Chen looked at him. I'm not going through the lobby, Damian said. Chen was quiet for a moment. Then Hendricks said, I know what Hendricks said. He said, wait for authorization. He also said his timeline is 50 minutes from now, minimum. And the call said 6 hours from 1:23, which means we have until 7:23, which means we have time. He paused. But Vasile doesn't know what I've given Hendricks. He doesn't know the scope of this morning's conversation. He made the call, expecting me to be manageable. I want to talk to him before Hendricks's team comes through the front. I'm not asking for permission, Chen. Chen looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, I'm coming in. I know, Damian said. They got out of the car. The freight elevator smelled of machine oil and the particular staleness of a space that moved things and people without caring about either. Damian and Chen rode it to 14 in silence. Damian's ribs were a sustained complaint on his right side, not sharp, not the acute pain of a break, but the grinding persistence of badly bruised tissue that objected to every breath above a certain depth. He breathed shallowly and ignored it. The 14th floor freight entrance opened into a utility corridor that ran behind the building's server room and HVAC equipment toward the northeast corner office. Damian had walked it once, a year ago, during a meeting that had included a brief tour of the floor's security infrastructure, a tour he had requested, citing concerns about document security, and which Vasil had provided with the particular thoroughness of a man who wanted his clients to feel confident. Another thing he had filed away. The door to the northeast corner office was wood core with a standard commercial handle set, not reinforced. Not electronically secured, the electronic security was on the main entrance off the elevator lobby, not here. This was the private entrance, the one used when Vasil needed to move between the office and the freight corridor without being observed from the lobby. Damian tried the handle locked. He looked at Chen. Chen reached into his jacket and produced a tool that was not something you purchased at a hardware store and had the lock open in 40 seconds without a sound that would carry beyond the corridor. They went in. Aldrich Vasil was at his desk. He was a compact man in his late 50s, with the neat, careful appearance of someone who had learned that looking unremarkable was a professional skill. Gray suit, no tie, the kind of reading glasses that folded small. He was working on something at his computer not urgently, just steadily. The posture of a man in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. And he looked up when the door opened with the expression of someone expecting a specific person and seeing two different ones instead. The expression lasted perhaps 1 second. Then it went away and something else replaced it. Something controlled and assessing, and he reached for the desk. Chen was faster. He crossed the distance to the desk in 3 steps, and his hand came down on Vasil's wrist before Vasil's fingers reached the desk drawer. And the specific pressure of Chen's grip produced a sharp intake of breath, and then stillness. "Don't," Chen said. Vasil was still. Damian closed the door behind him. He crossed to the desk and opened the drawer and looked at what was in it, a Glock 19, compact, recently cleaned, and picked it up and put it in his jacket pocket and sat down in the client chair across from Vasil. He sat the way he always sat, fully, weight committed. "Claire Bowman," he said. Vasil said nothing. "I have 6 hours," Damian said. "You called at 1:23. It's currently..." He checked 2:48. "So I have 4 hours and 35 minutes, which means we have time to have a productive conversation, and I'd prefer that to the alternative." Vasil said, "You shouldn't be here, and yet. You've already spoken to federal authorities. Coming here is a violation of Mr. Vasil." Damian leaned forward slightly. "I understand the instinct to frame this as a procedural problem. It isn't. It's a practical one. You have a woman in custody, an innocent woman, a pediatric nurse, someone who has no knowledge of or involvement in anything, and you're using her to pressure me to retract testimony that I've already provided to a federal officer with a recording device in his jacket, which means the testimony exists regardless of what I do next, which means the leverage you think you have isn't leverage." Vasil looked at him. "The woman's safety is going to be resolved by federal agents within the next 3 hours," Damian said. "Hendrix's office in Milwaukee is already locating her. They'll find her. The question is whether they find her before or after someone in your organization decides that a living witness is a liability." He paused. "I'm here because I want her found before." Vasil was quiet. "Tell me where she is," Damian said. "That's all. One location. And I'll tell Hendrix that your cooperation began before his team moved, which is the kind of detail that matters when agreements are being written." Vasil looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "You burned everything this morning." "Yes," Damian said. 11 years, yes. For a woman who left you last night." Damian said nothing. "I read the situation report from Victor's contact," Vasil said. "She packed her bag and left her ring and wrote you a letter and walked out. And you called Hendrix and burned your organization for a woman who had already decided she was done." Damian looked at him steadily. "Where is she?" Damian said. Vasil said, "You are either the most principled man I've encountered in 30 years in this business, or the stupidest." "Location," Damian said. Vasil reached up slowly. Chen's hand tightened and then eased as the reach produced a pen, not a threat, and wrote something on the notepad on his desk. He tore the page off and held it out. Damian took it. An address. Milwaukee, the River West neighborhood. 3 blocks from Claire's apartment he stood. "For what it's worth," Vasil said, "I didn't intend for the woman to be harmed. The call was designed to buy time. It's a standard. I know what it was designed to do," Damian said. "It doesn't change what it is." He walked to the door. Behind him, Vasil said, "Cross." Stopped. "The network above yours, the people you gave Hendrix this morning. They won't accept this quietly. Whatever protection the federal agreement provides, there are people in that structure who have been operating for 40 years without interference. They will treat your cooperation as an attack and respond accordingly." A pause. "I'm telling you this because you should know what's coming." Damian said. I know what's coming. He opened the door, and he and Chen went back into the freight corridor, and the door closed behind them. He called Hendricks from the elevator. He gave him the address. Hendricks said, Where did you get this? You went into the building. Yes, I told you. I know what you told me. The address is 2847 North Fratney Street, River West, Milwaukee. That's where she is. Move your people. Hendricks was already moving. Damian could hear it. The change in the ambient sound on the call, voices in the background sharpening, someone saying something with urgency. And Hendricks came back. We're moving. Do not go back inside that building. I'm in the elevator, Damian said. Damian Hendricks used his name for the first time. Not Mr. Cross. Just the name. The way you used a name when you wanted a person to understand you were speaking to them specifically. Go somewhere I can reach you. This isn't done, I know, Damian said. He hung up. The elevator reached the lobby. He and Chen walked through it and out into the February afternoon, and the cold hit his face and his ribs reminded him of themselves, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his hands in his pockets. His right hand found the ring. He had been carrying it since the kitchen counter. Closed his fingers around it and stood on Wacker Drive, with the February wind off the river cutting through his jacket, and he breathed carefully through his nose to keep the rib pain manageable, and he looked at the city, Chicago in February. The particular gray-white of it, the light hitting the river at an angle that made the water look like hammered metal. The sound of it not loud, just constant, the layered ambient sound of a city that never actually went quiet, only changed registers. He had lived here his entire life. He had built something here that had its own mass and gravity, had pulled people into its orbit and held them there, and occasionally crushed them. And he had told himself for years that the thing he was building was a kind of order, structure that protected the people inside it from the worst disorder that would rush in to fill its absence. He had believed that. He was no longer sure he believed it. Chen said from beside him, Where to North Shore? Damian said. But not yet, then where? The Michigan Avenue office. There are files I need to pull before Hendricks's people go through it. Chen said financial records. Personal records, Damian said. There are personnel files for every man who worked for me. Addresses, family information, employment history. When the organization dissolves, and it's dissolving, it's already happening. Those men are going to need documentation of legitimate employment for the years they worked. References. Work history that holds up, he paused. Some of them have families. I'm not leaving them with nothing. Chen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's going to take a few hours. I know, Damian said. They got in the car. The Michigan Avenue office was quiet when they arrived. Marcus was there. Marcus was always there, had been there since 6 that morning, would probably be there until someone physically turned the lights off. He looked at Damian when he came through the door with the particular expression of a man who has been managing information all day and has run out of ways to organize it. He said, Milwaukee. In progress, Damian said. Hendricks's team is moving. Marcus exhaled once through his nose and Victor. Federal custody as of this morning, and the organization. Damian looked at him. Marcus nodded slowly. He had known, Damian realized. Not the specifics, perhaps, but the shape of it, the direction things had been moving since the ring on the counter, and the letter, and the drive north through the February dark. Marcus had spent 6 years learning to read the direction of things before they arrived, and he had spent this morning managing the office with the quiet competence of a man who understood that his job was changing, even if he didn't know yet exactly into what. Personnel files, Damian said. All of them. I need copies of everything employment history, compensation records, the skills documentation I had Helena put together for the legitimate front employees. All of it. That's about 300 files, Marcus said. I know. Then start now, Damian said. Marcus started. Damian went to his office and sat behind his desk, for what he understood might be the last time, and he looked at the surface of it, the desk he had chosen himself, a substantial piece, dark walnut, the kind of desk that was designed to communicate permanence, and he opened the center drawer and looked at what was in it. A photograph. Him and Serena, early in the marriage, before the pregnancy, before all of it taken at a restaurant by a friend whose name he'd forgotten, the kind of candid shot that captured something the subjects didn't know they were showing. She was laughing at something he'd said. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at her. He didn't remember the moment, couldn't place the restaurant or the occasion or what he'd said that made her laugh. But he could see, in the photograph, what he'd looked like while she was laughing, And the thing he could see in his own face in that image was something he didn't recognize from the inside, something open, something without the controlled architecture of his normal expression. He put the photograph in his jacket pocket. His phone buzzed. Hendricks. He picked up. Hendricks said, "We have her." Damian's hand tightened on the phone. "She's unharmed," Hendricks said. "Physically unharmed. She's shaken. She was held in a residential property in River West. 2 men, both in custody. She's asking for her sister." "Tell her she'll see her sister tonight," Damian said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. Does she need medical?" "She's refusing the ambulance," Hendricks said. "My agents say she's angry. Apparently she's been angry since about 20 minutes after they took her and hasn't stopped." Something moved in Damian's chest. He thought of Serena at the kitchen table. "Something about Victor makes me careful." He thought of the letter written and rewritten. He thought of the charcoal coat from the consignment shop that she wore when she needed to feel like herself. Serena's sister was angry, unbroken and angry. "She sounds like her sister," Damian said. Hendricks said, "The men who held her are talking. They're not loyal, they're contractors, hired through a logistics firm that your morning testimony helped us identify. They're giving us names." A pause. "It's a good morning's work, Mr. Cross. It's not done," Damian said. "No," Hendricks said. "Not even close. But the architecture of it is falling. People at the top of your network, the ones you gave me this morning, we have enough now to move simultaneously across 7 jurisdictions. Kind of coordination takes time to arrange, but it prevents anyone from warning anyone else." A pause. 72 hours, possibly 48. "And in the meantime, I need you somewhere I can reach you quickly, and somewhere that isn't easily findable by people who now consider you a significant problem." "North Shore," Damian said. "Send me the address." He sent it. He sat for a moment in the walnut desk office that smelled of coffee and the particular dry warmth of a building in winter, and he thought about all the mornings he had sat here and made decisions that had seemed, each of them, like the correct and necessary application of the logic that governed his world. He thought about how many of those decisions had been made in the certainty that he knew the shape of what he was operating in, and how the last 24 hours had demonstrated the specific dimensions of that certainty's limits. He thought about Serena at the North Shore property, waiting. He thought about what he owed her. Not the dramatic version, not the gesture or the sacrifice. Those were already spent. The other kind. The kind she had meant when she said earn it. The kind that didn't have a single dramatic moment, but consisted, instead of 1,000 small choices across a long time, each one the deliberate application of a person trying to become something they hadn't been. He didn't know if he could do that. He knew he was going to try. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and found the ring and the photograph, and held both of them and sat in the office that was no longer his, and breathed carefully through his nose against the rib pane, and listened to Marcus moving through the filing system in the outer office, pulling 300 files, one by one, for men who deserved to walk into whatever came next with something in their hands. Phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Different from the morning's call. Different prefix, different pattern. He looked at it. He answered. The voice that came through was not Vasil's carefully measured Romanian accented English. It was someone else older, from the sound of it, and unhurried in the specific way of a person who has never in their professional life been required to hurry, who has operated at a level where the concept of urgency was something that happened to other people. The voice, Mr. Cross. "I think it's time we spoke directly." Damian's hand closed around the ring in his pocket. "My name is not important," the voice said. "What's important is that I represent the interest that exists above everything you burned this morning. The network that Hendricks believes he's dismantling. The structure that has been operating for 40 years, and will continue operating long after this current difficulty has resolved itself. A pause, measured and deliberate. We're not calling to threaten you. We are calling because a man of your capabilities and your particular knowledge of the operational landscape represents a significant asset, and it would be wasteful to treat you as a problem when we could treat you as a resource." Damian said nothing. "What we're proposing," the voice continued, "is simple. You provide Hendricks with the mid-level documentation he needs to close his investigation and satisfy his superiors. Cooperate fully with the prosecution of Victor Hale and Aldrich Vasil, both of whom are, at this point, expendable. And in exchange, the people above that level, the people whose names you have not yet given Hendricks, the people who have been operating for 4 decades, remain where they are." A pause. Your wife and her sister are safe. Your future is protected. And the thing you built here, in some form, continues. The office was very quiet. Damian could hear Marcus in the outer office. File drawer opening. The sound of folders being pulled. He said, "You want me to stop at the mid-level?" "Yes." "Give Hendricks enough to close the case, but not enough to reach you." "Correct." "In exchange for safety and a future. In exchange for a reasonable outcome," the voice said. "For everyone." Damian was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the walnut desk. He looked at the window, the Michigan Avenue view, the city in its February gray, a block west, catching what light there was and throwing it back changed. He thought about the photograph in his pocket and the woman in the North Shore house and the canvas suitcase and the ring. He thought about what Victor had said. You would have done the same. He thought about the specific quality of his own face in the photograph, the open thing, the thing without the controlled architecture. He thought about what kind of man his daughter was going to have for a father. He said, "No." The voice was quiet. "All of it goes to Hendricks," Damian said. "Every name, every structure, everything. That was the agreement, and I'm not revising it." Pause. "Mr. Cross?" the voice said. "Consider carefully." "I have," Damian said. "The answer is no." He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand and the ring in his other hand, and he felt the weight of what he had just done, not the moral weight, not the righteous weight, but the plain practical weight of a man who has just declined the last offer and understands that what comes after declining is not negotiation. He called Hendricks. He said, "They just called me directly. Senior level, not Vasile, above him. They offered to let me stop at the mid-level documentation in exchange for their protection." Hendricks said, "What did you tell them?" "No," Damian said. "I'm going to need you to move faster than 72 hours." "I understand," Hendricks said. "Get to the North Shore property now. Don't stop. Don't take a route you've used before. There are files here. Marcus can finish the files," Hendricks said. "Go now." Damian stood. He looked at the office one more time, the desk, the window, the city, the accumulated texture of 11 years, and he walked out the door. In the outer office, Marcus looked up from the filing cabinet with a folder in his hand. Damian said, "Finish the files. Courier them to Helena's home address when they're done." "Not the office, her home." Marcus said, "You're leaving." "Yes." Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Was it worth it? Any of it?" Damian stopped. He thought about the question, the way you thought about a question that deserved an honest answer, rather than a managed one. He said, "The organization, no. Not the way I ran it." Pause. "Other things, yes." Marcus nodded once. Damian walked to the elevator. The doors opened and he stepped in and turned and looked at the outer office. Marcus already back at the filing cabinet, already pulling the next folder. Steady competence of a man doing his job until the last possible moment. And then the doors closed and the elevator descended, and the Michigan Avenue office with its walnut desk and its city view and its 11 years of accumulated decisions became something above him, that the numbers above the door measured his distance from, floor by floor, until the lobby arrived and the doors opened and he walked out into the February cold. His car was at the curb. He got in. He pulled out of the Michigan Avenue parking zone and into the city traffic, and he pointed the car north, and he drove, and the ring was in his right hand against the steering wheel, and outside the city moved past in its February gray, and somewhere ahead of him, on the north shore of a lake, a woman was waiting in an 11-room house with her hand on her stomach, and her sister's voice on the phone, alive and angry, and the specific future that existed on the other side of this day was not yet visible, but it was there. And it was the only direction he had left. He pushed the car north through the early evening, and the February dark came down around the city like a held breath finally released, and the lights of Chicago fell away behind him. And the road ahead was dark and open, and without landmarks, and Damian Cross drove into it with both hands on the wheel, and everything he had ever built, already burning behind him in the rearview mirror. He made the North Shore in 51 minutes. The property sat back from the lake road, behind a stand of white pines that had been there longer than the house, older than anything Damian had ever owned, trees that had grown through decades of winters without asking permission from anyone. The driveway was unpaved deliberately, because paved driveways showed up on certain kinds of satellite mapping that unpaved ones didn't, and the car moved through the frozen gravel with a sound like something breaking slowly, which was not a metaphor Damian needed right now, but which arrived anyway. He stopped the car. He sat for a moment with the engine running, and the heater going, and the ring in his right hand, and the February dark pressing against every window. Then he turned the engine off and got out. The cold was immediate and specific, the lakeside cold that carried moisture in it, the kind that found the gaps in your clothing and settled there. His ribs reminded him of themselves with the first full breath of outside air. He stood beside the car for a moment and looked at the house lit from inside, warm yellow light through the ground floor windows, the particular look of a house that has people in it after being empty for a long time. He walked to the front door. He didn't knock. He had a key and he used it, and he pushed the door open and stepped into the warmth of the entry hall. Voices from the back of the house, 2 of them, both female. One of them laughing a short, disbelieving laugh, the kind that happened when something was not actually funny, but the alternative to laughing was something harder to manage. He stood in the entry hall and listened. Then Serena appeared in the hallway. She had changed her clothes. She was wearing something of his, a gray pullover that was large on her, and which she had pushed the sleeves up on, and her feet were in the thick socks she always wore in cold houses, the ones with the wool heel reinforcements that she bought in bulk, because she was perpetually cold and perpetually practical. Her hair was down. She looked like someone who had been through a very long day and had decided at some recent point to stop performing composure and simply exist. She looked at him. He said, "Claire's safe," she exhaled. It was a small sound, barely audible, but he felt it across the hallway, the specific quality of a breath that has been held through fear long enough, that its release was almost a physical thing, almost a weight set down. She said, "I know. Hendricks called. She called me 20 minutes ago." A pause. "She's coming in the morning. One of his agents is driving her down." "Good," Damian said. They stood in the hallway looking at each other. From the back of the house, the other voice said something and then laughed again. And Damian realized it was Reyes, who had apparently been performing some function for the last 2 hours that involved making Serena laugh in the short, disbelieving way, which was information Damian was going to set aside for now. He said, "How are you?" She looked at him for a moment. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'll know in a few days when everything stops running on adrenaline, and I have to actually feel it." She paused. "How are your ribs?" "Manageable. You need to stop saying that." "They're manageable," he said. She crossed the hallway and stopped in front of him and looked at his jaw, which had fully developed into a bruise of considerable commitment in the 4 hours since the lakeside house. She put 2 fingers along the edge of it, not tenderly, with the same clinical precision as before, checking the damage, and moved them along the bone. He held very still, she said. "Nothing's broken, I know." "The rib." "Not broken. Bruised, you need ice and you need to sit down," Antea said. She dropped her hand. She looked at him for a moment with the particular look she had when she was deciding how much of what she was thinking to say and in what order. Then she said, "Come to the kitchen." He followed her. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee, and whatever Reyes had apparently found in the pantry, that the property's caretaker kept stocked something with onions and canned tomatoes, something practical and unglamorous, and exactly right for a February night at the end of a day like this one. Reyes looked up when Damian came in. He looked at Damian's jaw, then at Damian's right side, and made the specific assessment that men who have worked together a long time make without words. Then he said, "Sit down, I'll get ice." Damian sat. Serena poured coffee from the pot on the counter and set a cup in front of him and sat across the table. The table was old pine, the kind of table that had seen use ring marks from mugs, a burn mark near one corner, a surface that recorded things without complaint. She wrapped both hands around her own cup and looked at him. Reyes put a dish towel wrapped around ice against the side of Damian's face and said, "Hold that." Damian held it. Reyes took his bowl of whatever he'd made to the far end of the kitchen and sat down with it, and gave every indication of being entirely absorbed in his meal, which meant he was listening to everything, and had decided to be as unintrusive as the room allowed. Serena said, "Tell me what happened after we left." He told her. All of it, the Wacker Drive building, Vasile, the file that Chen had opened in 40 seconds, the conversation in the northeast corner office. He told her about the personnel files, and Marcus at the filing cabinet and the drive north. He told her about the call in the car, the voice that had no name, the offer. She listened without interrupting. This was one of the things about her. She listened completely, with her whole attention, without preparing her response, while you were still talking. It was a quality he had noticed early and had never fully adjusted to, because it meant she actually heard what you said, instead of what she expected you to say. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They'll come back." "Yes," he said. "The people above Vasile, the ones you turned down." "Yes. Hendricks can't protect us from all of it. No, he said, some of it for a while. But not all of it and not indefinitely, he paused. Relocation is a real possibility. Depending on how the prosecutions go, how much of the network Hendricks can actually dismantle, what the remaining exposure looks like. He held her gaze. That's a decision you'd have to be part of. I know, she said. It would mean... I know what it would mean, she said, sharply. Just precisely. I've been thinking about it since the lake house. I know what it would mean. He looked at his coffee. She said, my mother's house is on Calvert Street. She's been there for 34 years. Claire's in Milwaukee. I have a teaching license that's current in Illinois. She paused. I know what it would mean. I'm sorry, he said. The words came out without the organizational structure he usually gave them, without the controlled delivery, without the framing. Just the words plainly, the way a person said something, when they were too tired to be anything other than direct. She looked at him. I know you are, she said. I believe that you are. A pause. It's not the same as it being enough. No, he said. It's not. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the lake was doing whatever February lakes did, at night the ice shifting, probably. The sound of it occasionally reaching the house as a low, structureless groan, the sound of something massive and cold, adjusting to its own weight. Serena said, the night you called Cassandra. He didn't say anything. I need to understand something about it, she said. Not to punish you with it. I need to understand the actual mechanics, because I've been carrying a version of it all day, and I don't think my version is right. He said, ask me. Victor gave you the photographs. And you looked at them and you believed them. I understand that the photographs were convincing, and you had context that made them plausible. She paused. But you went from believing them to making that call in what, 3 hours? You didn't ask me. You didn't ask anyone else. You didn't pull any of the threads that you pull every time you receive information in your professional life. Her eyes were steady on his face. The ice pack was cold against his jaw. He held it and thought about the question with the honesty it deserved. Because in my professional life, he said slowly, when I receive information about a threat, I respond to the threat. I assess it, I verify what I can verify quickly, and I respond. It's reflex built over 20 years. He paused. And I think I stopped. She waited. I think I put you in the category of threat, he said. When I saw those photographs, I think something in me processed your possible betrayal the same way it processed every other threat to the organization, and responded accordingly. Not because I didn't love you, but because the machinery of how I respond to things, it didn't make a distinction. She looked at him for a long time. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, she said finally. I know, it's also the most frightening. I know that too, he said. She looked at her coffee. She ran her thumb along the edge of the cup in a small back-and-forth motion that he recognized it. Was what her hands did when she was thinking through something complex and didn't want her face to show the working. She said, I don't know if I can fix that in you. She looked up. I don't know if it's something that can be fixed or something that has to be managed around. And I don't know if I have the capacity to spend my life managing around it. I know, he said. Stop saying you know. What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me what you're actually going to do differently. Not what you're going to try to do or intend to do. What you're actually going to do. Specifically, he thought about it. He thought about it the way he thought about operational problems concretely, in terms of actions and their consequences, without the abstraction of intention. He said, I'm going to ask questions before I respond to anything that involves you. I'm going to build in a delay, not a long one, but enough to break the reflex, enough to make a phone call or ask a question. He paused. I'm going to see someone, a therapist, someone who works with people from this kind of background. Hendricks actually has a contact, part of the transition resources. She blinked. You'd do that, she said. I said I would. You hate being... She stopped. I know what I hate, he said. I also know what I almost lost. She was quiet. He said the ring. He reached into his jacket pocket and set it on the table between them. Caught the kitchen light and held it, the simple platinum band on the old pine surface, between the coffee cups and the ring mark from some previous occupant's mug. She looked at it. She didn't pick it up. She said, I'm not ready for that. I know, he said. I'm not putting it there for tonight. I'm putting it there because it's yours, and I've been carrying it all day, and it should be with you. She looked at it for a moment longer. Then she reached out and took it and held it in her palm, not on her finger, just in her hand. The way you held something you weren't ready to commit to, but weren't ready to put down either. He looked at her hand around the ring and said nothing. He slept in one of the upstairs rooms. Not the primary bedroom. Serena had taken that. The largest one, the one with the bathroom and the view of the lake. He took a room down the hall, a smaller one with a bed that was slightly too short for him, and a window that faced the tree line rather than the water. He lay on top of the covers with his jacket off and his ribs complaining, and he looked at the ceiling and listened to the house. The house had the specific sounds of an occupied place, Reyes moving quietly on the ground floor, the settling of the structure in the cold, the occasional creak of the floor in the primary bedroom that told him she was still awake, still moving, still working through whatever she was working through. He did not sleep for a long time. When he did, it was the sleep of a body that has run past its limit, sudden and total. Without the layer of vigilance he usually kept running beneath it, the sleep of someone who has finally, for one night, run out of things to guard against. He woke at 4:47 a.m. to the sound of the front door. He was up and moving before he was fully conscious, the reflex doing what it did, and he was at the bedroom door in 4 seconds and in the hallway in 5. The house was dark. Reyes was on the ground floor. Damian could hear him moving, could hear the absence of alarm in the way he moved, which told him the door was not a threat. He came down the stairs. Serena was in the entry hall, still in the gray pullover and the wool socks, standing with the front door open and the February dark pouring in around her. She was looking out at the driveway. Damian said, "What is it?" "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I heard the ice on the lake, and I wanted to hear it closer." She hadn't gone out. She was standing in the open door looking at the dark, the cold coming in freely, her breath making small clouds in the air of the entry hall. He came and stood beside her. Outside, the pines stood against a sky that had cleared sometime in the night, no more cloud cover, just the deep black of a February sky above a frozen lake, and enough starlight to make the snow on the ground faintly visible. And the lake, he could hear it now, the groaning of the ice, low and irregular, the sound of a massive cold thing talking to itself in a language that had no translation. She said, "When I was writing the letter this morning. Feels like 3 days ago." "Yes," he said. "I wrote 4 pages," she said. "I didn't tell you that. You mentioned it. I tore them up. The 4 pages. She paused. "You want to know what was in them?" He looked at her profile. "If you want to tell me." She thought about it for a moment. "I wrote about my mother's kitchen," she said. The yellow curtains. "I wrote about the chair she wore a mark into the linoleum. I wrote about the day I decided to stay in Chicago instead of taking the job in Boston, because I was already in love with you by then. Which I didn't fully know yet, and which I told myself was a professional decision." A pause. "I wrote about the first time I understood that you were capable of this, of what you did last night. Not the details. I knew what you were capable of. I married you knowing." The air was very cold. She wrapped her arms around herself, not asking for anything from him, just holding her own warmth in. He said, "Why did you marry me knowing?" "Because I thought the knowing made it manageable," she said. "I thought if I went in with my eyes open, it couldn't catch me off guard." She paused. "I was wrong about that." He said nothing. "But I was also—" She stopped, recalibrated. "I wasn't wrong about what I saw in you, what was possible in you. The thing in that photograph, the one on your desk at the office. You don't know the one I mean." "I do," he said. "I took it tonight." She looked at him. He reached into his jacket pocket and held it out. She took it and looked at it in the faint starlight. She looked at it for a long time, long enough that he began to feel the cold in his feet through the socks he'd fallen asleep in. She said, "You're looking at me like you didn't know it was being taken." "I didn't." "That's the thing," she said. "That's the thing I married." She handed the photograph back. "Problem is I couldn't always find it. Some days I went looking and the whole man was just—" She moved her hand. "Architecture. Control distance, I know," he said. "You can't say you know every time I tell you something difficult." "I know because I felt it," he said. "I knew when you'd stopped finding it. I didn't know how to, I didn't have the—" He stopped. "I didn't have the language for making it visible when you needed it." She looked at him. "That's not nothing," she said quietly, "knowing you felt it." "It's not enough either," he said. "No," she said, "but it's not nothing." They stood in the open doorway for another moment. Then she said, "Come inside, you'll freeze." She stepped back from the door. Claire arrived at 9 in the morning. She came in a nondescript sedan with a federal agent in the front seat who had the particular look of someone who had been driving since before dawn and wanted coffee very badly. Claire herself came through the door with the specific energy of a woman who had processed fear through anger and was now running on the other side of it, tired, wired, her dark hair pulled back in the uneven way of someone who had done it herself without a mirror in imperfect light. She looked like Serena around the eyes. The same assessment, the same directness. Less controlled or differently controlled, the control of someone who had chosen a life where emotion was a dulce rather than a liability. Stopped when she saw Damian. Serena was behind her, and Damian watched her sister's eyes go from his face to Serena's, and then back to his, running the calculation, reading the room the way people who grew up reading rooms learned to do. Claire said, "You're the reason I spent 8 hours in a room in River West, with 2 men who smelled like they'd been living in a car." Damian said, "Yes. You're also the reason they sent someone to get me out, before anything worse happened." "Yes," he said. Claire looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, "I'm reserving judgment." "That's fair," he said. She walked past him and found Serena in the hallway, and the two of them went somewhere toward the back of the house, and the sound of their voices merged into something low and continuous and private that Damian understood was not for him. He went to the kitchen and made coffee for the federal agent and sat at the pine table and waited. Hendricks came at noon with a colleague, a woman named Sato, who handled witness coordination and who brought with her a briefcase full of documents that represented the formal structure of what Damian's life was going to look like for the next 2 years. Immunity parameters, testimony schedule, civil forfeiture proceedings, the properties, the financial accountants, the accumulated mass of 11 years translated into legal instruments. Process of becoming, officially and irreversibly, the thing he had decided to become. They sat at the pine table, and Sato laid out the documents in order and walked through each one with the patient thoroughness of someone who had done this before and knew that the details that seemed administrative were the ones that mattered most. Serena sat beside Damian. She had asked that morning whether she could sit in. She had asked it of him, not of Hendricks, a distinction he noted. He had said yes. She had sat down and she listened, and she asked 3 questions during the 2-hour session, all of them precise. All of them about provisions. He hadn't thought to ask about Claire's status as a named victim in the proceedings, the conditions around the North Shore property and its discoverability, the timeline for the civil forfeitures, relative to the birth date of their daughter. The phrase had been used by Sato in the context of a provision, and Damian had heard Serena go slightly still beside him and then return to the documentation without comment. When Hendricks and Sato left at 2 in the afternoon, Damian and Serena sat for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen. He said, "The forfeiture timeline." "I heard it," she said. "The Michigan Avenue property and the financial accounts will be processed before the birth. The North Shore property is protected under the provisions Sato outlined. There'll be enough." "I know," she said. And then, catching herself, "I heard it. I understood it." A pause. "It's enough to start with." He nodded. She said, "I called the school district this morning." He looked at her. "Not about a job yet. About my credentials, whether they'd transfer if we had to relocate, whether there were reciprocity agreements with other states." She paused. "There are most states. It takes a few months of paperwork, but it's doable." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "You're planning." "I'm always planning," she said. "That's not new." "No," he said. "I know. He stopped. "I always thought the planning was about not trusting me to have a plan. I understand now it was just how you are." She looked at him. Something in her face shifted slightly, the way a surface shifts when light moves across it from a different angle. Nothing dramatic, just a changed quality. She said it was both for a while. "Fair," he said. They sat outside, through the kitchen window. The February afternoon was doing something unexpected. A thin, pale sunlight had found a break in the cloud cover and was lying along the snow with the tentative quality of early light, like it wasn't sure yet if it was going to stay. He said, "I want to ask you something." She waited. "The letter," he said. "The 2 paragraphs, the ones you left." She looked at him. "You said the first line," he said. "I loved you enough to leave before our child learns to fear you." "What was in the second paragraph?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I wrote that I hoped you'd eventually understand that what I was doing wasn't punishment. That leaving wasn't cruelty. That I was leaving because I thought you needed to experience the actual consequences of what you'd done, which was losing me, and that I didn't believe you'd ever arrived at a real consequence before in your life. Every mistake you'd ever made, you'd had the resources to manage around it. You could buy consequences away, or intimidate them into submission, or restructure the situation until the consequence was no longer visible." A pause. "I thought that losing me, actually, completely, with the ring and the letter and the suitcase, was the only consequence that didn't have a workaround." He sat with that. "Were you right?" he said. She looked at him for a long time. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in a year." He nodded. She said, "There's something else in the letter I didn't write." Something I thought but couldn't figure out how to put down, without it sounding like something it wasn't. Tell me now, he said. I thought I wrote the letter, and I kept starting the sentence and tearing it up that I hoped you'd find me. She held his gaze. Not right away. Not before I'd made it far enough away to have the distance to think. But that you'd find me, and that you'd come not to bring me back, but to I don't know. To be seen doing it, to make the gesture that had no guaranteed outcome. She paused. I've never seen you do something with no guaranteed outcome. The drive to the lake house, he said. Yes, she said. That was it. That was the thing. I would have done it regardless, he said. Whether you let me in or not. Whether you came home or not. I know, she said. That's what I mean. The thin February sunlight moved across the kitchen floor as the break in the cloud shifted and traveled, and the pine table held it for a moment, and then the clouds came back and it was gone. 3 weeks later in the North Shore house, Damian Cross sat in the kitchen at 6 in the morning and read the news on his phone, and drank coffee and listened to the house. It was quieter than the Michigan Avenue penthouse. Different quality of quiet, not the silence of a space designed for one kind of life, but the silence of a house that was learning what kind of life it was going to hold. Claire had stayed for a week and gone back to Milwaukee, and her clinic and her Civic parked 2 blocks from her apartment, and she had hugged Damian on her way out with the specific brevity of a woman who had decided to give someone a provisional pass and wasn't willing to make more of the gesture than it was. Reyes had left after the first week. He had work, or what passed for it now, the legitimate security consulting that Damian had helped structure before the formal dissolution of the organization. Reyes was good at what he did, and he was good at adapting, which was the quality that had made him valuable in the first place. Marcus was working with Helena now, processing the personnel files, coordinating the employment documentation, making the calls that needed to be made to the men who had worked for Damian Cross and who now needed to work for someone else. It was slow work and unglamorous, and Marcus was doing it with the same steady competence with which he had done everything for 6 years. The organization was gone. Not abstractly gone, physically gone. Systematically dismantled. Its structures dissolved into legal proceedings and forfeitures, and the institutional machinery of a federal investigation that was now running on its own momentum, no longer dependent on Damian's active cooperation, but built from what he had given it. Victor Hale was in federal custody and had been denied bail on the grounds of flight risk and the particular persuasiveness of $11 million in documented transfers to a foreign-connected account. His attorneys were competent and expensive, and would keep the proceedings moving slowly, which was how these things went. He would be convicted eventually. The evidence was of the kind that didn't have exits. Aldrich Vasile had cooperated. Vasile was always going to cooperate. He was, as he had demonstrated in the Northeast Corner office, a pragmatist above all else. And pragmatists calculated the cost of resistance against the cost of cooperation and generally arrived at the correct conclusion. He was cooperating under terms that Hendricks had described as comprehensive and that would in time reach into the structure above him. The voice on the phone, the unhurried voice, 40 years of operation, had gone quiet, which was not the same as gone. Hendricks had been clear about that. These things took time, and time was what they had. Damian closed the news and set his phone face down on the table. He heard movement upstairs. The particular sound of Serena getting up, not the quick movement of before, but the careful navigation of a body. In the final weeks of pregnancy, the sound of the floor taking weight differently. The deliberate pace of someone who had learned to move in conversation with what her body was doing. Poured a second cup of coffee. She came down the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail, and appeared in the kitchen doorway in the gray pullover still his. She had apparently decided it was hers now, and the wool socks, and she looked at the coffee cup on the counter and then at him. She said, "You didn't sleep." "I slept," he said. "I got up early." She came in and picked up the coffee and stood at the counter with it. She was 34 weeks now. Her face had changed in the weeks at the North Shore house, not softened. That wasn't the right word. Settled. As though the sustained crisis of the last month had resolved into something else, something that required a different quality of attention, and her face had adjusted accordingly. She said, "Hendricks called last night. He looked up. After you went to bed." "Yes. He's moving on the upper structure next week. 7 jurisdictions simultaneously. He said testimony is the linchpin." She paused. "He also said, and he wanted me to pass this on because he thought it would land better, coming from me, that the protection provisions are being extended for 18 months instead of 12. because of the scope of the upper structure and the length of the proceedings. Damian said he was right that it lands better from you. I know, she said. He's perceptive. She looked at her coffee. I've been thinking about what comes after the 18 months. Tell me, he said. I want to go back to teaching, she said. Whatever state, whatever city, wherever we end up, I want to be in a classroom. She paused. I also want our daughter to have a father who is home in the evening. Not every evening, but most of them. Yes, he said. And I want us to see someone together. Not just you, both of us. Because there are things in how we communicate that are mine as much as yours. I know how to go silent when I should speak. I know how to carry information alone because I learned early that asking for help was a vulnerability. That's not your problem. That's mine. He looked at her. I made it worse, he said. Yes, she said. But it existed before you. She said this without softness or hardness. In the plain declarative way, she said things that were simply true. He had been receiving the truth from her for 2 years, and only recently had started understanding the full value of it, that she did not edit what she told him out of management or self-protection, that her precision was a form of respect. He said, I found a practice in Evanston, a therapist who works with people from backgrounds like mine, transition situations. Hendricks recommended her. You already called. Last week, he said. She looked at him steadily. The appointment is next Tuesday, he said. She set her coffee down. She crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him, and he looked up at her from the chair, and she looked down at him for a moment. Then she put her hand briefly against his face. The bruise was mostly gone now, a faint yellow at the edge of his jaw, almost healed, and she held it there for a second. Not tenderly, not dramatically, just specifically. A hand on a face, the contact of a person who has decided to remain present in a situation that does not guarantee safety. Then she dropped her hand and went back to her coffee. He sat with the shape of that gesture for a moment. He reached into the pocket of the sweater he'd been wearing for 2 days and found the ring. He had been carrying it since the kitchen counter of the abandoned lake house. He had carried it through the building on Wacker Drive and the Michigan Avenue office, and the drive north, and the meetings with Hendricks and Sato, and 3 weeks of mornings at the pine table. He had carried it not as a strategy, not as the thing he would produce at the right moment to produce the right result, but because it was hers, and she hadn't taken it yet, and the space between those two facts was where he was currently living. He set it on the table between them. She looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked it up and looked at it in her hand, the simple platinum band, the one she had chosen herself, because she didn't like things that drew attention, and she was quiet. He said nothing. She slid it onto her finger. She did it without ceremony, without looking at him, without the weight of a moment being made into something larger than it was. She put the ring on and picked up her coffee and looked out the kitchen window at the February morning and the white pines and the lake beyond them, which had gone from frozen to something in between, the ice pulling back from the edges in the way that February ice did when the season was finally slowly beginning to consider something other than itself. She said, I'm not forgiving you this morning. I know, he said. I'm putting the ring on because I'm choosing to stay in this, and I wanted you to know that. Not because it's resolved. She paused. It's not resolved. I know, he said. She stopped herself. Okay, you can say that one. He looked at his hands on the table. She said, when she's born, our daughter. Yes, he said. I want her to know you as someone who is still becoming. Not someone who has arrived. She paused. I think that's the most honest thing I can offer her. A father who is still in the process of becoming something better. That's not nothing. No, he said. It's not nothing. The morning light came through the kitchen window and lay across the pine table between them, pale and honest and entirely without drama. The light of a February day on a lake in a house that was learning what kind of life it was going to hold. Damian Cross sat across from his wife at the old table with the ring on her finger and the coffee going cold between them and the sound of the lake in the distance. And he did not think about what he had built and burned. He thought about the appointment on Tuesday and the classroom she was going to stand in and the child coming in 6 weeks and the specific quality of a woman who had packed her canvas suitcase in the dark and still, in the end, opened the door. She had not opened it because the past disappeared. She had opened it because she had decided to believe that the space between who he had been and who he was capable of becoming was a space worth inhabiting. He was going to spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of that decision. Not perfectly, not without failure, but honestly and consistently and with his eyes open. The lake shifted beyond the white pines, and the February morning held, and the house was quiet around them, and that was enough. That was for now exactly enough.